Hey guys, welcome to the Frightful Freeway YouTube channel, and I am Maris, and I'm here with
Omar from
and
the I didn't think that far ahead.
Scary Street.
That one doesn't sound that cool. Frightening Freeway.
Yeah, I literally just did that, bro.
Did you?
Yes. But anyways, we'd like to thank you for I guess reaching us 100 subs. A little late, but you know, better late than never. You got anything to say to the people?
Thanks. That's it's a big milestone, you know.
Huge. Hopefully for the next one we could produce this a lot quicker.
Yeah, a lot better.
Yeah.
Well, not a lot better. Actually, it's pretty good so far, but I mean like just quicker and
more efficient way.
More efficiently, yeah.
But I mean we really appreciate it, and hope you guys enjoy these 50 horror stories.
It's a long one, so get ready to like
get scared.
Get a bag of chips, or start studying and have this in the background, or I don't know what people listen to.
Scary stories to chill and study to.
Yeah.
All right. Anyways, thanks for listening, and hope you enjoy the video.
Later.
I never believed in skinwalkers until June of last year, when I had my own horrifying encounter. I was in Dallas, Texas, visiting my ill grandfather shortly before his passing. Now, nothing odd happened while I was at the hospital, but every time I was staying at his house, my grandfather spent his last few weeks in the hospital, and my grandmother had passed away a few years prior to help maintain it and the finances. For the first 2 weeks, I would wake up at about 3 in the morning to hear my grandmother's voice at the back door asking to be let in. I knew it couldn't be her, since I was at the funeral. Every time I heard the voice, I would take a peek outside the back door to see a deer standing on its hind legs at the edge of the property. It never got any closer, though it would flee every time it spotted me. Shortly before my grandfather passed away, he made mention of the skinwalker. He asked if she had come back, or if I had let her in. I said yes, and then no, to which my grandfather smiled. He said to never let it in if I wanted to live. I didn't understand then, but I do now.
Be me, 25 years old, driving home the Grand Junction after a weekend in Las Vegas with 2 friends. We drive the first half of the journey in the late afternoon, stopping around 7 p.m. at McDonald's before heading out for the last 5 hours of the drive. Second half of the drive is east along Route 70 in Utah. Anyone who's driven this bit of highway will be able to tell you how quiet and barren it is. There's several stretches where you're driving over 100 miles without so much as a gas station. It's almost all desert, scrub brush, dry riverbeds, and tumbleweeds. The occasional farmhouse or ranch building pops up now and again, but most of them are abandoned. About 2 hours in, we're all startled by a loud popping sound. I look around and see nothing immediately wrong before noticing a small chip in the front window. Must have been a pebble shot up from the road, but there was no car in front. Just seconds later, it happens again. Another small chip. I glance back at my friends in the backseat. Both are on their phones, oblivious to just what happened. I call out to them to stop playing around in the back and check if they can see anything. I look in the rearview mirror again and see something very strange. Just a couple 100 yards behind us, a huge black cloud is billowing up off from the ground. I can't make out any details through the windows, so I pull over onto the shoulder. It looks like it's coming right towards us. We stay inside the car until the cloud engulfs us, blocking out everything. It's pitch black and we're all trapped inside the car. All I hear is faint sobbing coming from the backseat. Then suddenly I feel a sharp pain across my neck, followed by total silence. I woke up lying on a bed. I'm in a hospital room. I'm later informed that we were found 30 feet down from a bank at the side of the road by another driver. He pulled us all out of the car and called 911. Apparently my friends also woke up screaming, which is why he didn't try to help. By the time the ambulance arrived, the others had calmed down enough to tell them about the darkness. Given the fact that we were young and on the way back from Vegas, the EMTs assumed that we were drunk/drug driving and crashed on the highway. The doctor said I passed out due to a loss of oxygen to the brain and then developed a seizure when I came around. I don't remember anything else after the silence. My parents didn't say much. They kept asking me how much I had to drink, but I couldn't answer them. There was this awful, hollow feeling inside of me, like I knew something terrible had happened and I couldn't shake the sense of my dread. Me and my friends spoke about the drive a few days later. One didn't remember anything and felt fairly relaxed about the situation, lucky to be okay. The second really didn't want to talk about it. I told him about the cloud and he just nodded, looking terrified without saying a word. I pushed him to remember anything he could. He said only one thing to me, which will haunt me till the day I die. It wore you, like a mask. I still think about that night every single day. I've never shared this with anyone, not even my girlfriend. It feels like it's eating away at me. I can feel it growing deeper and darker each day. I can't ignore the thought of being attacked by whatever it was.
I know skinwalkers are real. I've seen my fair share of them. But in reality, I've only ever seen the one. When I was a boy, my grandfather told me stories about skinwalkers, of witch doctors, who would sacrifice members of their own family in order to gain power by appeasing the spirits. I'm unsure as to whether or not it's true. I suppose it doesn't really matter anymore. I saw the skinwalker for the first time at the age of 10. My father took me hunting one day, since he always preferred to source his own meat and wanted to encourage me to do the same. Most of the day went about as normally as you'd expect. He was teaching me how to track deer when we started to smell something horrible. It was like something died and was rotting, but right next to us. My father told me it was possibly just some animal that had unfortunately died and decided that we should move on. The strangest thing is that the smell seemed to be following us. We walked for about 3 miles, and even though we should have been far away from the source of the smell, it was still strong. We ended up stopping near a small stream, so my father could refill our water bottles. He also liked drinking stream water, saying it was often better than factory bottled spring water. Just as he was about to fill the first water bottle, he stopped and looked behind us. He quickly grabbed his hunting rifle and quickly raised it as well. I turned around and saw what he saw. Right as he fired 3 shots, I only saw a glimpse of it, whatever it was, before my father grabbed me and ran downstream. I was screaming as he dragged me along, since I didn't know what was going on. We eventually made it out of there, without encountering it ever again. A few years later, and another 2 times seeing it again, in the same forest, my grandfather sat me down and told me that what I've seen was in fact a skinwalker. I've only seen it 5 more times since he told me that. Before I moved away from the area, I'm more curious than scared, and I'm planning a trip back home so I could try to gather evidence that it exists. And it isn't just in my head.
Alright then, here it goes. So this was about 10 or so years ago, but I've only just gotten permission from my brother to disclose this story, since I felt his input was the most crucial. So here goes my carnival days and my brother's obsession with unicorns. Be me, 19-year-old high school dropout who literally ran away to join the circus. I'm working the carnival circuit, getting with South Africans who practically run the joint. They like me, ask me what I do. I said I'd like to operate the rides, and the big boss let me know that you need some kind of permit to operate rides. Ask what I could do then, and he tells me to go to the juggler. I received the proper training to be a juggler. For anyone in the carnival track, a juggler's last learned skill is how to juggle. No one cared about jugglers unless they're juggling fire or chainsaws. That said, a juggler is the staple of any carnival or circus. No one suspects a thing when all your employees mention that you're the juggler and nothing else. That's why jugglers were invisible, and that's why juggling made more cash than just about any ride operator if you were skilled enough at it. I worked the circuit a couple of times. The whole place picked up and moved to another location, but never really left the Chicagoland area. I was never far from home, but I rarely spoke to anyone there. My older brother and I had been mostly silent compatriots. He liked unicorns. Now before you go and assume he's into a certain purple dinosaur, too, he hated that one show. In fact, I was actually a fan until the mid-3rd season. Everyone knew he liked unicorns. People would buy him cutesy stuffed ones. He had posters of unicorns fighting dragons and other badass fantasy themes with them. He'd even cited as a fact that he believed they're real. Honestly, he'd take up a stance when people would bring up God, and he could say that he believed in unicorns, and so far no science can prove that. That said, only recently did he say why he believed. I saw one. Now I was pretty much ready to throw him in the psych ward at that point, but he admitted he was young, and I chalked it up to false childhood memories. We all kind of remember something. Our imagination came up with when we were little, and we were too naive to not know it wasn't real. Despite the knowledge I know now, at the time I thought nothing of it, and just thought my brother really liked unicorns. So one day, while I'm out juggling, I pilfer a receipt. The receipt was $4,000 to be paid on arrival for a unicorn. I called my brother on my first phone, a Nokia brick. I told him about the receipt thinking he'd get a laugh like me. He asked if the receipt had an address. It did. He asked me how much money I could scrounge together. I told him about 1.5k. While true, I said it like a joke, but his voice was determined. I can get the rest. I'll be there to pick you up. I wasn't even done with my shift, but he didn't really ask me. He pretty much just told me we were going before hanging up. I told the chief I was heading out early. I gave him his part of the money I made juggling, but told him nothing about the receipt. My brother arrived precisely when he said he would. That was not new. He almost always predicted how fast he could get to a desired location and would typically arrive on the minute. I get in the car. He asked if I need to stop at the bank. I said yes, and he said do it fast, and proceeded to open the map to chart our course. He tells me to put it with the money in the back. I noticed a bowling bag, but it was far too light to be holding a ball. It was filled with cash, not even bound neatly by hundreds. It was waddled up 20s and a scarce 100 around. Doing as he said, we came up to the property that the receipt sent us. There were like 3 horse trailers along the side. I'm expecting a scam, but the anger of the voice that came from the house told me otherwise. Holding a gun, the man basically kicked open his front door and sighted his rifle up to us. I thought you said it was just for you, no one else. I was no good in social interactions, but my brother was even worse, so I took up the torch. I'm sorry, he found out and is really into unicorns and begged me to see it. The man seemed content, but still unhappy about this. It's in this one. The man pointed to the first horse trailer closest to us. Hook it up to my truck and I'll take your cash now. I want to see it first. My brother said in a tone like he was dreaming and walked forward to peek in the window. Better get to your friend. He's looking like he's seen enough. My brother had already dropped the bag just at his side and the man picked it up without a word between them. Curiosity got the better of me and I looked with my brother through the window. I saw nothing, just blackness in the window. My face pressed close until my whole vision was black. As I fell away from the window, I realized I was sitting in the passenger seat of my brother's car. It's a shame too, was the first thing I heard when I came to, but he continued as if I was listening the whole time. He was a really nice specimen, but he didn't like you. Who? I croaked out. The unicorn, he said calmly. There was nothing in there. We were carrying an empty trailer. I turned and looked out the back window of the car. No trailer, no bowling ball in the backseat. What happened? I asked. My brother just says, "Oh my god, you don't believe in unicorns, do you?" "Since when?" he asked. My silent questioning echoed within the car. "But I do." "Since when?" he asked, smiling like a Cheshire cat. "Right now. Next time you'll see it," he said with a grin on his face, but turned to the road. They're more beautiful than I could have ever imagined. The event was never really mentioned again between us, but neither of us looked at unicorns at the same way. There was a sort of bond that was established while seeing unicorns in public. No one glanced like we were both in on a joke. Eventually, we go our separate ways again and start our lives. I called him up recently to ask him about the time we bought a unicorn. Yeah, he really didn't like you, he reiterated during the conversation. I didn't tell him what I had seen before calling him. I merely asked him if I could tell the story. He didn't care. He was always a laid-back guy and basically knew his name wouldn't even be attached. The true terror that instigated this call was none other than that unicorn. I was even staring at it through my back porch window during the call. It was nothing like the white glittery depiction on Girls Trapper Keepers. This thing was unlike any animal I'd ever seen, but somehow while looking at it, you just knew what to call it. Unicorn. Ideally perfect, flawless, and stunning anatomy that puts even the most biologically advanced animals to shame. When I turned on the light in my dining room where I can see the back window from, as the light turns on, the unicorn was gone in an instant and the light turned on like a shadow. I may not be the most pure human on earth, but I feel like there are people way worse than me to warrant a unicorn's wrath.
So people have been disappearing recently. They'll go missing for weeks before reappearing out of nowhere. The problem is that when they eventually return, they can't speak, don't recognize anyone or anything, and act strangely, almost as if they're trying to imitate themselves. Everyone can tell something is wrong. A family that went missing last year reappeared, even though we found their bodies in a cabin they owned. I helped search for them. You should have seen the little girl. It was horrible. Skinwalkers used to be common here, but after the mayor got a bunch of shamans in a few years ago, they all but disappeared. I think they've returned, but nobody wants to believe me. It may already be too late.
Never really believed in the paranormal. Worked on the road mostly with my brother. Stayed in hotels across the country. Myrtle Beach, 2016, Fairfield Inn, pick of the hotel. Long road trip on a Sunday night and had to work early in the morning next day. staying on the 3rd floor away from the main entrance. We're both super tired and it's around 9:30 at night. Brother passes out and I lay down the bed. I always leave the TV on a low volume, helps me sleep. Extremely fatigued, the kind of tired you know you're gonna fall asleep the moment you hit the sheets. For reference on sleep paralysis, I've had it before, and it was one of the worst nightmares of my life. What I'm about to describe did not at any point feel like sleep paralysis. I lay down. Brother's already lightly snoring. Right as I close my eyes, I suddenly jolt awake, like I just sucked down an espresso shot. Eyes go wide as possible, and my hair stands up, full goosebumps. I notice there's an abnormality in the lighting in the room. There's a spot where light should be by the door. The dark spot devoid of light moves slowly past the TV. TV actually loses brightness, like someone turned the brightness down to 25% for 3 seconds, and then put it back up to 100%. I realize I've gone full panic freeze mode. I don't know what to do. I'm shaking, but I'm absolutely paralyzed by fear. Something just walked into my room and walked past my TV, but I can't see it. Almost want to scream for my brother to wake up and make a run for it. This abnormality has been in the room for maybe 30 seconds now. The abnormality of light seemingly settles in the corner between my bed and the corner lamp. The corner is now the darkest part of the room, like light can't really penetrate into it. I still can't move. I actually feel like if I acknowledge whatever it is, something awful will happen. I start mulling over the fact that maybe I'm asleep with my eyes open, but I can still move my toes and fingers, something I couldn't do when I had sleep paralysis a few years back. The room kinda clicks. I don't know how to explain it. For about 5 seconds, it feels like somebody had light in a bucket and just started pouring it back into the room. Everything seems normal now, and the dark spot in the corner is gone. Go back to sleep. Wake up the next day and realize that actually happened. Tell brother a few years later. He believes me. He tells me that something didn't feel right when we stayed there, but he didn't want to say anything.
My dad owned a cabin out in the woods in West Virginia, and it was tradition that he would take me and my brother out there hunting every spring. By all accounts, I enjoyed spending time with my dad. He was busy most of the year with business, so these hunting trips were the only real time me and my brother got to spend with him. I was 15 when this happened. We were staying in the cabin for a week. For the first 3 days, we had a few decent catches, hares and the like, but we were finding it difficult to find any deer. This was odd, as deer are usually everywhere. At night, we were hearing these strange noises, like animal calls at night, and scratches on the door, but we just assumed that there was some strange animal about. On the 4th night, we didn't hear anything. I was fast asleep when my brother woke me up by screaming. We were sharing a room. I told him to shut up before realizing why he was screaming. There was a strange figure standing over his bed, holding an axe. It just stood there saying, "It's okay, son. Just go back to sleep," over and over again in my dad's voice. Just then, my dad came into the room with a shotgun and shot the creature, or whatever it was. It didn't seem like it was fazed by that, and it screamed at him with the same scream that woke me up before jumping out the window. My dad didn't waste time and dragged me and my brother out to the car and drove us 218 miles back home. He told me later that the thing in our room was a skinwalker. He later sold the cabin, and we haven't been back since.
A friend of my dad's would babysit me sometimes when I was little. Mom wasn't in the picture, and he used to tell me a story that scares the absolute shit out of me to this day. Dad's friend, I'll call him Bob, is driving a rig out in the middle of bumfuck nowhere, Oregon. He has to make the delivery by the following morning, so he decides to just drive through the night. It's like 1 in the morning, no one else is out on the roads. Hasn't seen another car in probably 100 miles. He's literally in the middle of nowhere. Suddenly, the whole entire sky lights up. Instantly, like daylight. Bob fucking slams on the brakes, has no idea what the hell is going on. Everything stays lit up for a good solid 10 seconds. He can see everything. Whatever's happening, it's not lining. It doesn't stop or flicker at all. Bob hunkers down, anticipating imminent nuclear devastation. Suddenly, sky goes dark again. No sound, no blast wave. He sits there in the middle of the road waiting for almost 5 minutes, then decides to keep going. Figure it was a meteor shower or something. Goes up about 2 miles on the road and sees a car with its flashers on, stopped in the middle of the road. Stops a good distance away from it. There's not enough room to go around it. Front end of the car is crumpled like it hit something. Bob figures they probably hit a deer that got spooked whenever the meteor went over and ran into the road. He gets out of the cab and goes to see if the driver's okay. Driver's sitting on the ground by the driver's side door. Has his knees up and is resting his head on his arms. "Hey buddy, you okay?" Bob calls. He stops about 10 feet away for seemingly no reason. Something about the whole situation feels weird. Bob is one of those guys that always listens to his gut, so he stays put. "God, my head is killing me," the guy says, but he doesn't lift his head up, so it's muffled. "Did you hit a deer?" Bob asks. He's getting more and more uneasy. Something's wrong, but he can't still figure out what exactly it is. The guy says he thinks he might have hurt his head, asks Bob to help him. Bob takes a step forward, but his instincts are going apeshit. He looks at everything around him. That's when he notices it. The fucking car is all wrong. It looks like what someone thinks a car looks like. Has all the right pieces, but there's nothing extra, if that makes sense. Bob says it looked like a cheap Hot Wheels knockoff. It just looked wonky and wrong. He looks around at the back of the car and realizes that not only is there no license plate, there's not even a trunk. It's just one solid piece of material with taillights put in it. There's no manufacturer or model's name. Bob knows cars, and this thing is nothing he's ever seen before. From where he's standing, he can see there's no tailpipe or even hubcaps. It's just the shape of a car. He starts to back up and the guy asks for help again. Bob tells him he can't help him, that he'll call a tow truck when he gets to the next town. The guy lifts his head and looks at Bob. Tells him he thinks he might have a concussion. Something is really wrong with the guy's face, but again, it takes a second for Bob to figure it out. The next part is exactly how Bob described it. Everything on the man's face was where it should have been, in their normal positions. He looked totally normal, except for the fact that his eyes and mouth were upside down. Bob goes apeshit and sprints back to his rig, climbs in, locks the door just in time for the man to slam into the door behind him. How the fuck did he get there so fast? He knocks on the glass and smiles at Bob, but because his mouth is upside down, it looks like he's screaming. Tells Bob to open the door so he could come in. Bob fucking floors it. Doesn't care if he hits the guy or not. His truck easily pushes past the car on the road. Whatever it is, it's light and makes no sound when he hits it. Unfortunately, it's an anticlimactic ending. Bob got where he was going with no other problems. My dad knows this story, but I don't think he believes it. But Bob tells it to everyone he meets, so he obviously does. He's absolutely adamant about the guy being an alien. Years later, I heard about the Thatcher effect, and nearly had a fucking heart attack when I saw it. I showed one of the pictures to Bob, and he wouldn't even look at it. Says exactly what the guy looked like. Pic very much related.
I was working on my first ever job in retail. I was around 20 years old. It was a busy morning, 9 a.m. Somewhere mid-December, hence why it was so busy. I was working the checkouts, as per usual, scanning items, ringing up customers, and all that jazz. About an hour into my shift, I was serving an elderly man who just bought a handful of items. After giving him his subtotal, another guy behind him, smelling a booze, stretched out, handing me cash. I kindly told him I wasn't serving him. I was serving the man in front of him. Then I looked down and saw he was buying some cheap knockoff branded Baileys. Some booze, of course. I figured out this guy is wasted. Just as I was taking payment from the elderly man, I was planning in my head how I was going to tell the next guy that I cannot sell him alcohol as he was already drunk. As this was my first job, and I never encountered this sort of thing before. So I finished serving him, and now onto the drunk guy. I looked around in hopes to find another colleague or my manager, but no one in sight or available to help. So I looked at the man, and just before I opened my mouth, I felt like someone grabbed a fistful of my hair and something sharp poking me in the back. And of course, a man whispered in my ear, which also smelled of alcohol, on his breath, "Serve my mate." He pushes, which I'm assuming, a knife harder into my back now. In complete shock, I said nothing, just scanned the bottle, took the cash, and they were gone. I quickly turned around to my colleagues working checkouts behind me, but all they did was look at me and asked if I was okay, completely unaware of what just happened. Then, I went for my break. I see my manager pass by, so I rushed over to him and told him what just happened. All he did was laugh because he thought I was joking, but criticized me for selling alcohol to someone who was under the influence. Whatever the sharp object was in my back cut me. Before my break, I felt blood running down my back, and it was sore. Of course, I couldn't see the blood as my uniform was black. I screamed, "It's true, it did happen." I turned around and lifted my hair. As I have very long hair, lift up my shirt or get a female colleague close by to do it. This guy fucking sliced me. But the manager just said, "Ew, I don't want to see you lift up your shirt," and just walked away, staring into his phone. Well, I did not return to finish my shift. I snuck out the store, took a taxi and went home. My mom cleaned up my bag and dressed it. Then, the next morning, she called the work to tell them I will not be returning, as the manager's incompetence to take actions when I could have almost been stabbed over a bottle.
Okay guys, this happened to me last night and I haven't been able to sleep since. I was hesitant to post it on X because I've been looking for some sort of explanation or something, trying to see what it was. I saw outside, now that it's light out, but I cannot, and it's scaring the shit out of me. I usually just frequent B, mute, and lit, so excuse me if this is something you guys have some explanation for already. Please just tell me there's a realistic explanation for this and that what happened is common. I'm fucking terrified. Get home from work. It's almost midnight. When the door opens, the home security does its high-pitched beep beep chime. In my kitchen, eating a late dinner before going to bed. Hear a door open, and then the home thing go beep beep, but it definitely sounds like it came from the outside. I'm sitting right by the back door, so I go check the front door. The front door has a screen door, a wood door that leads to a small entry room, then a second door inside that leads up to the stairs into the house. These are old ass doors. Did not hear a screen door open, did not hear main door close, did not hear second door open. The door is still double locked, no other doors are opened, nobody's standing outside. Okay, maybe it was a neighbor's door. Maybe they have the same system. Hear it again. Sound like it's coming from the outside of the front of the house. Look out the window. Looks like a deer is crawling on the yard with its belly to the ground. Stands up on its back legs. Makes the door opening / beeping sound with its head raised up to the air. It's not a deer. It looks like a guy with deer legs, too dark to see what the fuck is going on. What the fuck, dog give? Sounds like a dog barking "I'm home" while trying to vomit. Starts galloping across the street. Starts shaking. It's raining out at the time. The thing opens its mouth and holds its head up. Thing starts digging furiously at the grass across the street with its front arms / legs / things. Puts head near the hole, like it's looking inside. Keeps walking down street. Puts head back to drink rain. Digs at ground. Keeps doing this down the block before galloping away down the division, away from the city. I do not live in a rural area. The deer population typically stays down towards Melrose Park off Thatcher by the river. I live just outside of Chicago, literally a block away west of the city limits. I have never seen anything like this, or heard of anything like this. I am fucking shitting myself right now. I was gonna post this story on B, but I avoid B like the plague unless I'm bored. It's summertime and I just get memed on left and right, and this seems more paranormal than anything else. I've been googling for similar stories and trying to find some sort of typical scientific explanation for this sort of thing, but I can't even find any sort of similar story. My instinct is crazy homeless guy, but its legs bent back like deer's. It was not built like a human being, and it was definitely not wearing clothes, and it looked like it had a full body of fur. I don't use drugs. I was not tired. I was 100% lucid, and I'm fucking horrified. Please say there's a common explanation for shit like this.
I was always a very curious child. As my parents could probably tell you, what piqued my curiosity the most as a child was a large patch of forest just beyond the boundaries of my backyard. When I was 8 years old, strange howling sounds would come from the patch of the forest every night. For about 3 months. My father never spoke about the sounds, instead ignoring them. My mother would only say that he wasn't allowed due to him being Native American. As you might guess, this always confused me. As I said, the sounds lasted for around 3 months, and ended shortly after the medicine men from my father's tribe paid a visit and went into the forest with him. Thinking back, I'm not sure if it was a skinwalker or a wendigo, but I'm certain it was one of those two.
Little brother is really into astronomy. He's about 7 years old. Likes to look at the stars and watch things. About 3 weeks ago, he spent literally the entire night looking at one part of space from his room. never once moved, didn't even eat. When he gets up at about noon the next day, I asked him what it was he was looking at. I was looking at the screaming stars. What are you talking about, you little brat? There's a place I found where if you look at it, you can hear screaming. No way. I'll prove it to you. Wait until about 11 at night. Telescope hasn't moved since the other night. Look into it. Hear very faint screams. Eventually gets louder. Have to look away. I noped out and told our mom, and she took away his telescope. I'm never gonna look at the stars again.
So this is going to be hard for 2 reasons. 1, I have never talked about this to anyone before. 2, this thing that happened was the worst event in my life, so it's a bit complicated. All this was very quick, and I still have no idea why it happened. Anyway, my name is Matthew. I'm 16 years old, and I live in Italy. My house is in a little village in the mountains near Mont Blanc, the biggest mountain in Europe. Useless to say that there isn't much activity around here during the day. A very small amount of cars pass by, and there's usually no people around. It's a very calm and cool place at the end. The event took place last April. I just got out of school after a 2-hour-long Latin test, and I was basically already sleeping at that point. I unlocked my bike, waved at my friends, and left taking the main road that led to the village I live in. As always, there were no cars, no people, nothing. I was tired, and while riding, I was thinking about the usual things a 15-year-old thinks when coming back from school. The should I do my homework first or video games kind of stuff. I was probably overthinking and kept going along the road without realizing. I didn't take the right turn. I noticed my mistake a few minutes later and thought, never mind, I'll just take the long way. Because at the end of the road, you could take a path that led to the village. I didn't know yet, but that was probably the worst mistake I've made in my entire life. I kept going, and at that point the road was going through a little forest. All the trees above me were stopping the already small amount of sunlight there was. So it was basically night. I turned on the bike's flashlight and moved on to the right side of the road. Everything was quiet until I heard a car sound coming towards me. I was a bit surprised because, as I already said, there was basically no car activity in the area, especially at this time of day. I did not panic after all. It was just a car passing by. After a while, I saw the headlights approaching from the road. The car was still pretty far away and going at a slow pace, like the driver was looking for something. Then the car sped up and, at my surprise, turned right to get in front of me. Confused and not wanting to get hit by the vehicle, I turned left, bringing the bike on the other side of the road. The car did the same and speeded up even more. I had very little time to realize what was happening because the car was moving at full speed towards me, and I was about to get hit. So I did the first thing that came to mind and jumped off the bike onto the right side of the road. I did that just in time because the car ran over the empty bike just a few seconds after I jumped. I sat on the asphalt, my knees and elbows burning from the fall, trying to realize what just happened when I saw the driver of the car getting out of the vehicle. He was still on the side of the road, now running towards me without saying a word. I got up as fast as I could, but the guy still managed to grab my left arm. I screamed, turned around, and landed the strongest punch I could, possibly taking the man's nose. The guy didn't flinch. He let go of my arm. His nose is now bleeding and smiled at me before running back into his car, started the engine, and left. I was in complete shock. I grabbed what was left of my bike and ran home as fast as I could. I was so scared that I left my backpack in the middle of the road and went back to get it the next day. That's it. I never knew who the guy was and why he tried to run me over with his car. This is my biggest and only trauma that I've experienced in all my life. I can tell you, I will never take that road again.
Be me, 15, American. Go to rich private school in Desert State. School is super old, used to be a Catholic church. Main office is still there, but chapel is not. Rumors about there being a cemetery on grounds. Get curious, decide to do digging. Turns out church has been there for decades. Definitely cemetery on school grounds.avi. Do more digging. Find old photo of church in late 1950. See off the side, gravestones. Jackpot. Wait until weekend and make my move. Grab a few friends and make our way to school. Live in middle of nowhere desert, super cold at night. Get to school and head over to where the gravestones were in the photo. Turns out it's on the soccer field. We are so fucked if we get caught. Start digging. Had to stop a few times because cops, but eventually we dig deep enough until one of us puts his shovel and we hear it crack. We just broke a fucking femur. Oh, we are so cursed. Two of us get rowdy. Cops come back due to noise. Book it. Get to school next week. Fucking police tape around hole. Hear announcement in homeroom that detectives will be coming to talk to us and ask us questions. Rumors going around that they think bones are recent. Thinking I'm going to jail for whatever. My 15-year-old brain thought. Had mega anxiety at the time. Nothing happens until a month later. School cancelled out of the blue. WTF? Okay, day off. Have friends whose mom works in admin office. Hears that detectives are talking to principal almost daily. No school for a whole week. Walk by campus to see what's going on. Hear what sounds like fucking construction site where we were digging. Meet with admin office mom friend later. Tells me feds are involved. Feds basically excavating field. School went back to normal next week. Field was back to normal. Student who asked immediately suspended. No sign of principal. Heard he resigned.
I live in a small town in South Carolina, and as you might expect, it is boring as hell. I, however, spend a lot of my time camping, so it never really bothered me. Well, this particular camping trip took place in a popular campsite that was closed for the winter. It's closed between the months of October through March, and this happened late November, and it's something that has stuck with me ever since. I got my tent, a small stove, the rest of the camping equipment I needed, and permission from the owner, a good friend of mine, and quickly set up for an overnight stay near the community hall, like building, usually reserved for parties and the like. It was going well. It was only around after it got dark when strange things began to happen. For one, I started to hear wolf howls. That was a new one to me. Not really. I grew up in Cali before moving. Since there was no wolves in South Carolina, it didn't really alarm me since it sounded like they were far away. But it did have me curious as to how wolves got this far east. I listened to the howls for about another hour before I decided to try and get some sleep, but that didn't last too long. I didn't know how long it was watching me for, but I was awoken up by a howl of a wolf coming from the nearby community hall. It was, as I thought at the time, a single wolf. Looking back, I wasn't as scared as I should have been, and that was possibly because of the gun I had on me. Minutes went by and I didn't hear anything, and I assumed it had moved on when I heard it. A low voice coming from outside my tent. "I know you're there," it said. "Why don't you come out here so we can meet properly?" For some reason, I just froze up in fear. I can't explain it, but something about that voice just had me all locked up. "Don't keep me waiting, friend," it said through the tent. But I couldn't move. I wanted to reach for my gun, but I just couldn't reach it, despite it being right next to me. "Oh, come on now, friend. You don't need the gun. It wouldn't work on me anyway, friend." Hearing that was the worst part, or would have been, had it not immediately followed up by howling exactly like the wolf and started sniffing the tent. This went on for the rest of the night. To this day, I'm glad I didn't decide to tear through the tent, and have no desire to find out why I didn't do that.
I was a 22-year-old crybaby who had his GF of year cheat on me. I drink a handle of whiskey and call my dad in a drunken mess to pick me up. He's yelling at me as we drive to grow up. I tell him to pull over and let me out. He says no, and I threaten to jump out of the moving vehicle. He accelerates very fast and says, "I dare you." "Okay, Dad," and I jump out. Wake up in hospital, and then get put in psych ward. Young black girl in psych ward with me claims she had died several times and we are in a false dimension. She has cutting scars all over her wrist and neck. She's very pretty, but honestly scares the shit out of everyone there with her loud outbursts. Had a tone in her voice that would pierce your soul. I am interested and always trying to talk to her about the false dimension. She says that our current dimension is hell, for sins committed on the true dimension. Says the true dimension has beings made of gelatin materials and death is not possible, only sent to different dimensions for committing crimes. Will never explain how she knows this, and I do not believe her, but I do not tell her this. She starts to trust me and gives me a palm reading. This is a big deal because she freaks out about physical contact. She says if I have a mind that can see what she sees. Ask if I want to see the true dimension. I get nervous by the look in her eyes, but do not believe, so say yes. She grabs my hand very tightly and puts her head down, mumbling. I feel a warm, tingling sensation take over my whole body. I feel like I'm gonna black out and I'm getting very dizzy. The walls start shaking and melting, and I say stop, but she continues to mumble. I panic and start screaming, and the gorillas come running in and needle us both in the ass. I wake up restrained in the bed and they extend my stay by another 2 weeks. I do not mention what she said she was showing me out of fear of sounding crazy and not being allowed to leave. Just say she grabbed me violently. Never see her again.
Background: I lived in a border town growing up. Mexico was pretty safe at that time, and high school kids going across the border was no big deal, as our parents did it as well. It was the summer before I went to college, and I worked as a cocktail waitress at a nice club catering to the white residents of the city, as well as people in the Air Force Base. I was becoming friends with another waitress, who was a blonde, blue-eyed girl, well off, and whose parents left her by herself at their house by the lake. I was poor and Hispanic, but she was always nice to me. The club closed at 2 a.m. If we wanted to have fun ourselves, we have to go to Mexico, because at that time, friends' parties were done. This girl had been dating a rich Mexican guy. She was 17 or 18, and he was 19 or 20. He was considered a popi, a rich Mexican. The incident: after one of our shifts, my friend asked if I wanted to go with her and her boyfriend to a party in Mexico. I agreed. We were picked up in a beautiful black car by his driver, and he had a couple of friends with him, all well off and good looking. They took us out to a club that knew them. As soon as we walked in, the waiters brought multiple bottles of good quality liquors and mixers and garnishes. I had a friend, and her friends were kind of respectful. I drank a little bit, not much. We were only there for about an hour when the bar started to close. The guy suggested we go to Boys Town. For those who don't know about the US/Mexican border, there is usually a red light district with drugs, drinks, and prostitution. I agreed to go because I felt safe with the current group. Rich Mexicans, well known, and liked the adventure. I'm a bit of a risk taker. Any trouble would probably be from cops, and we could just give the crooked cops some cash. We take this fancy car through the dark dirt road outside the small city until we see the flashing lights of Boys Town, like a movie set. We go to one of the bars and enjoy the show. It's a mix of drunk college boys, Mexican cowboys, and the desperate women looking for their mark. I was surprised. There really is a donkey show, but it's not what you think. The whole night, my friend's boyfriend and his friends had treated us to drinks. I was getting drunk and needed to use the restroom. I walked down the red-lit hallway and encountered a prostitute with only a see-through scarf around her hips. She smiled at me, curled her small finger, and beckoned me to a small room. Being the curious girl that I am, I was tempted. She was beautiful, with wavy black hair. I smiled and started walking towards her. I suddenly felt strange. Surrounded, I guess is the feeling. I stopped and started to feel very uneasy. She continued to lure me into one of the small side rooms. I shook my head and returned to the table with my friends. Another drink was waiting for me. I took a couple of sips and just felt uncomfortable. I told my friend that I didn't feel well and asked them to stop buying me drinks. This is the scary part. She says, "We haven't been buying your last few drinks." Like nothing? What the fuck? I quickly turned to the bar and noticed that several men are looking my way. Someone I didn't know was sending me drinks. I told the group that I had to go and that if we didn't leave, I would make a scene. We left. I headed home and didn't speak. I felt super weird and amped. I haven't felt like this before, or after. I was off and feeling out of control. I got home at about 6 a.m. My mother was waking up and was wondering what I had done. I told her I had hung out with my friend, her boyfriend, and their friends, and I proceeded to stay wired for hours, trying to act normal. Maybe I'm paranoid, but I think someone was trying to hurt or trick me. I was a pretty girl who was poor. If I disappeared, so what? Was that prostitute trying to get my money? Or was she luring me into a trap? Who was buying me drinks that ended in me feeling out of control? For the person/persons who may have had a plan for me that night, let's not ever meet again.
Be me, 18, right after high school. Decide to take a cross-country trip before I start uni. Good times. Mostly camp. Need work every now and then. End up broke in New Mexico looking for work. Find work replacing roofs on Navajo reservation. Government project. The rest of the crew stays in the school overnight. I decide to camp out in the desert. First night, wake up to sounds of someone walking around my tent. Freaks me right the fuck out. Wakes in the morning and I find a pot I used to cook with missing. Find a yellow flower in its place. Next night, footsteps again. Another flower, but nothing missing. Third night, footsteps. I decide to investigate, get out of the tent and hear the footsteps scurry off. This is getting fucking weird. Start yelling into the desert, "What do you want?" Next night, I decide to sleep in my truck so I can look at my campsite during the night. Stay up all night. At around 3 a.m. I see her, a native girl about my age. She looks around my site and puts a flower on my cooking table. Get out of the truck, she runs off. Next night, she shows up again, but I left the flower for her. She picks it up and sits down by my campfire. I come out from the shadows and she starts to get up, but I calm her. I sit across from her. We were miles away from anything deep in the desert. I start asking questions. Are you out here alone? What are you doing out here? No answer. She stands up and gives me the follow me hand gesture. I do. I follow her. We walk for about a mile. I was camped at the bottom of a mesa. The breeze blowing down it at night was comfy. We wound our way through the corridors of the mesa and down into a canyon. In the canyon there was water and vegetation and shit. She knelt down beside the stream and picked a flower and handed it to me. She said in broken English, "Hold this, it will keep you safe." Then she kissed me. Safe from fucking what? She let go of my hand and walked towards the canyon wall. And then she was gone. Fucking gone. 1 second there and the second not. I had an urge to follow where she went to see what happened to her, but another urge that told me not to. Just turn around. I got lost out of there that night. Tried to go back the way we came, but nothing looked familiar. I walked all night and the half of the next day. Just before dusk, I ran into 4 Navajo men who were looking for me. They told me I hadn't shown up for work that day and everyone of my crew just thought I moved on. Until one of the people at the house we were working on overheard him saying that I told him about my nightly visitor and the flowers. The Navajos whose house we were working on was an elder and ordered a search party immediately. They told me she was a descendant of the people who lived there before them, that they had left the world thousands of years ago and moved into another. That very rarely a portal opens up where people can cross over. Legend goes that they send young pretty girls to lure men into crossing over to be used as slaves. Their telltale is a flower. If I would have followed her, I would have crossed over in who knows when, or if the portal would have opened up, or if I would have been able to find it. They said that if I didn't go on my own, the girls slipped me drugs and the kiss to make me confused and lost, and that night, if they hadn't found me on the other side, she was going to take me by force. They called her a poison woman.
My parents were out of town, and I lived in a small neighborhood upstate New York. My backyard was half cleared land and half dense woods. There was a small creek that ran behind my house too, so I could see all sorts of animals at night, including turkey, foxes, possums, raccoons, and deers. One night, around 1 a.m., I was on the couch in the extended living room part of the house, where 3 of the walls had windows, and we had a skylight. This is important because I had a complete view of almost everything of the backyard. This is important because I had a complete view of almost all my backyard up to the tree's edge, including the moon overhead, which was a waning crescent. I heard the sound of a very angry squirrel for about 5 minutes, and I kind of brushed it off because I've heard angry squirrels before. Then I heard the most terrifying screech. It sounded like a goose that had just been murdered, and screaming. It scared the crap out of me, and I immediately rushed over to the windows to see if I could see anything. I was worried. It might have been a wolf, since my neighbor's cat likes to go out wandering outside, and usually kills a bunny or two and leaves them in our front yard. I was worried it might have been a wolf, since my neighbor's cat likes to go wandering outside and usually kills a bunny or two and leaves them in our front yard. It was pitch black, and my porch light barely illuminated anything but our back porch. I brushed off the noise and went to bed shortly after. The next morning, I head over to my neighbor's house, who have hunted before and occasionally would bow hunt too. I asked if they heard that noise last night, and they said yes. They thought it was a deer crying for help. They told me they were going to investigate the woods in a few hours to see what had happened. I was reluctant to ask to go with them, but I was determined to know what the noise had been. A few hours later, my neighbors and me went to the woods. We didn't go too far when we saw a dead squirrel, pretty much ripped to pieces. We continued on, figuring that squirrels don't have much meat on them, so the animal probably tried to get as much as he could. We wandered for about 5 minutes when we came across 5 dead bunnies, a deer and her fawn, and a dead goose. Now this frightened me the most. 3 of the dead bunnies had just had their heads missing, and the body was intact. There were other 2 ripped to pieces, similar to the dead squirrel. I almost gagged at the smell of it all. I didn't dare walk towards the goose or the deer. My neighbor who had a bow on him walked towards the mother deer to see that she had long claw marks on her torso and her head had been mangled. The fawn, however, had its head missing as well. Now the weirdest part of all the dead animals was the goose. The goose was fully intact except that its lungs had been ripped open and all of its inner organs were gone too. My neighbor's wife immediately called the police and said that there was a bear roaming the property and was attacking innocent animals. I had my suspicions, but I did not believe that it was a bear. My neighbor who had a bow was keeping a clear eye on the surrounding woods, like he was watching for something. His wife paid no attention to this and continued to talk to the police. Then it hit me, a feeling of dread and chills. New York gets colder in the morning, but this summer, and the humidity was usually around 90%. The entire woods seemed to be silent as well. We were near the creek and couldn't hear the water flowing either. I could see my neighbor had the same feeling wash over him as he raised his bow and loaded an arrow onto it. He told his wife to be quiet and me to stand back. I could not see anything, but that feeling was still with me. My neighbor, I know, saw something, but refused to tell me what it was, since I was 15 and he probably didn't want to scare me. After a few minutes, the feeling of dread was gone, and the sound of something moving through the forest could be heard in the distance. My neighbor lowered his bow and told us that we had to leave. We immediately listened, and by the time we got back to the small neighborhood, the town police had arrived. My neighbor explained the story, and the police advised us to stay inside. They later sent a few animal control people to survey the area and tried to get the bear away from the neighborhood. They came back empty-handed. I never knew what was out there, but I did some research, and I believe it might have been a Wendigo by the dead animal killings. My neighbor refused to talk to me about it ever again, and my neighbor who had the bow seemed very cautious after that. If anybody has any insight on this, please say something. This happened a few years ago, and I now live in a different state. Edit. I haven't told anyone this story because I thought I was overthinking it a lot. Overanalyzing is kind of my thing. I do not have contact with this neighbor anymore either. Edit number 2. For anyone wondering, my neighbor moved to a bigger piece of land because he had hoped to bow hunt on his own property, and he could build a stand up in the trees. As far as I know, New York City deemed that it was still a form of hunting, and later the town police told him he couldn't do that anymore.
OP, I'm the foremost expert on this subject. My father was stationed in Antarctica at MC Murdo Station. He told me things. You wanna hear some fucked up shit? Go ahead, Anon. I'm listening. I'm using a name because it's easier for me to keep track of this shit. Some background. My dad is a doctor, was stationed at McMurdo for 11 months in the 90s. Not saying what year because he was the only doc there and y'all could track me down. Frequently went out on scientific expeditions. First and foremost, there were some areas people just didn't go to. They weren't environmentally hazardous. They were just avoided for one reason or another. When my dad asked one of the researchers who had been there for 10 years, he went pale and told him to shut up. It was about 30 miles south, 10 east of McMurdo. They took a 5-mile detour around whatever the hell was there. So already things are adding up. There were little outposts here and there, thinking of metal tubes sticking out of the ground with a hatch in the side. They were supposedly emergency and climate weather shelters, but the walls were too thick and they were always locked. Secondly was a weird structure. My dad said one time they were cresting a hill near the spot they avoided, and a gray building with a white roof was in the distance. And it didn't look like the normal shelters they used, but almost like an office building. Also sorry about spelling and shit. Think faster than I can type, and I wanna get this out there. Thirdly, there were the Striders. Big fucking 5-legged things that crawled across the continent at night or in snowstorms. There were sightings from the military personnel there. Most of McMurdo is US Navy. My dad had a Polaroid of one of the footsteps and track from one of the cars they had. It was easily a foot deep into the snow and was already packed down from a 10-ton truck. Also, what the normal shelters looked like. Big fucking 5-legged things? How big? Does the thing from Pick resemble it? Like Striders from Half-Life big as far as they know. Footsteps at least 30 to 40 feet apart, and now if you ever played Pathways into Darkness, one of the enemy resembles it, but only just think Pick related but white/gray, 7-8 stories tall, 5 legs instead of 2. Agreed, it sounds stupid, but what? A fast-growing, possibly supernatural apex cryptid, with a white spindly body that only moves in low visibility? I'm only parroting what I heard. I would say it's about 20 to 30 feet tall, but I wasn't there. My dad's theory is that while taking more eye samples we found something, dug it up, and one or more escaped. They grew into what roams Antarctica, and we shut down the continent because of it. 7 stories, fucking hell, they're big guys. How come no one is made public about them, or any photo? Also, be careful with your wishes, Anna, lol. Might be striders are there to watch after worse things. Do continue. KK, my guy. So as I said, my dad was a doctor. Got yelled out by a superior officer who said didn't need none of the unwanted smart types around here. Guy was a prick and hated anyone who wasn't a grunter or researcher. Let leak to my dad that there was a replacement for Doc who had snooped around, tried to scare my dad and shit. Guy was a total douche. One day, a guy who my dad knows for a fact isn't at McMurdo or any of the nearby bases comes in, escorted with severe lacerations. He is told that the guy fell. My dad calls bullshit. The cuts were too clean to be ice or rocks, plus no debris left in the wound. Guy's delirious, and while he's under anesthesia starts talking about things he probably shouldn't be saying. Something about we let them loose and they were frozen, we thought they were dead. He starts to say something else, but the guards yell at him to shut the fuck up and gag him. That's right, they gagged a guy who's only getting oxygen from a mask. My dad flips and rips it off, yelling at them, asking what the fuck they were doing. The guard sticks his M16 in my dad's face, forces it back to the quarters, and doesn't let him out till the dude is patched up and waiting on the next plane from South America. Oh yeah, but after that he started talking not of stuff. He had an Apple IIe he used for flight sims, and he started keeping track of information he gathered. Said he hasn't looked at it for years. I'm gonna try and get it out and running and see what I could find. Not much else I know about what went on. He said he saw striders a few times in the winter, but kinda hard to prove. Says he's forgotten a lot about those days. If I could find the computer, I could get more stories. Other than that, not much else. One time they hit something with the Dakar, which was a big deal since there aren't many penguins in the Antarctic. And when they got out, the researcher who told my dad to shut up forced him back into the car. Dad said it looked like one of the things from the Cloverfield movie, but you know, all fucking crushed to bits. So spindly little legs and the like. Says he thinks he was buried under the surface level snow, which is why they didn't see it. Snowstorms are a hell of a lot worse than people make them out to be. As I said, that's when people see striders. But there is banging on the doors, windows, walls, everything. Dad said he thought he saw one of those small things hit his window and bounce off once he was playing FA-18 sim. My bad, it was A11SI, not 11E. I would say with the fact that they both ran one over in summer and that they were most active in winter, it's very likely that these things like extreme cold. I have a hell of a lot more documents with my dad's name I could take photos of, but a quick Google reverse image will show this is original in many ways. I'm gonna see if I can get the 2SI to run. Give me a few, guys. I'm gonna take a picture and censor a name of the plaque my dad got from being stationed at McMurdo. We'll have the whole X and date thing in it to prove I ain't lying, as promised, and prove he was at McMurdo.
I had this really strange experience last year, and my brother just told me about BEK, and I feel like that's what I saw. So last year, during Christmas time, my sister and I were having a hard emotional night, and we decided to go looking around at Christmas lights. I was driving, and we were just crying and talking, and looking at the decorations. There was a meteor shower that night, and we ended up on this super creepy back road with nothing around. No houses or buildings, no streetlights, just woods. Somehow we both saw a meteor falling in the sky as I was driving, and we both screamed with shock and excitement. As we both looked back down onto the road, there was a small child on the side of the road. It had a backpack and was just staring at the car with this insanely scary grimace on its face, with huge black sunken-in eyes. It didn't move its body, but its head was just moving with the car. As we drove past, we freaked the hell out, screaming and crying, in just another shock. What the fuck was that? It filled us with such terror, and we were both so distraught and upset. We couldn't stop shaking and crying, and we couldn't rid ourselves of this horrible feeling. I felt guilty for not stopping if someone needed help, but it was in the middle of winter, late at night. Nothing was around that road, and there was no reason for someone to be there, and they weren't trying to flag us down for help, just staring. We called the cops and went home, and we couldn't sleep all night. I still have PTSD when I drive at night. I drew a picture when I got home, so I never forget what it looked like. I'll post that next.
Have a few. Gonna post at least one. Be me. Like 14, 15, summer before 10th grade years, so like 2013 I think. Been staying up all night like I do every night in the summer because unhealthy gamer, lol. I never missed sleep, just had a near nocturnal sleep schedule and had done that shit like every summer since I was 11, so no hallucination. Walk out into the living room, stretching, yawning, etc. Just moving about at shit like 7 a.m. Walk past couch full of random shit from the basement, moving soon. Sister's old Leapfrog brand Leap Pad goes off and starts making the intro song like when you would open it. This was an early 2000s children's electronic learning toy that was interactive and would read you stuff, tell you if you got your answer right, etc. Looks like pig. Not sure how new the image I'm using is. Isn't supposed to make a noise when closed. God knows how long it's been since it's been used. Shocked that it would even make a noise, and then it hit me that it shouldn't be. I did nothing that would have bumped it or anything. Didn't touch it to make it do anything, etc. Just walked past it and stared at it for like a minute, kinda freaked out. Take it back downstairs in the basement. I sleep. Freaked out a bit, I was real tired desu. Might post more, I don't know. Leapfrog Anon here. May have posted this one before, but I don't know, can't remember. Be me, small toddler. Used to go visit grandma on my dad's side. Nice old lady, kinda odd, but nice. Lived in a giant ass historic house that my gay uncles bought her. House is on a mural on the back of the plaza in town, Dexter, Montana. Used to always bring my ball and play with it up and down the hallway right in front of the door. On that hallway was a staircase that went up. Always gave me weird ass vibes and I would try to never go up. Couldn't even bring myself to look up the stairs all the way. Just acknowledging it filled me with an intense dread. House is an old historic roadhouse. I think there are many bedrooms upstairs. Years pass. Have a dream that I am upstairs in the upper hallway with the bedrooms. Dad comes running through and a demon was chasing him and jumped on his back. Demon looked like a skeleton thing from Pick related meme. Shadowy black mass of a body and had a normal skull as a face with spiky black shadowy hair / helmet like a mass on the cranium. Jumps on my dad's back and starts to push him down. Dad goes, "Anon, help me, Anon." Wake up freaked out. Few more years passed, grandma had passed. Go up to the house to look around and see what we have to do, etc. Like 7 or so at the time. Family going up the stairs. I am unsure, very hesitant. Bitch mom made me go up anyway. Intense anxiety and dread still. Get up to the top, the upper hallway which I have never been up to in my entire life prior to what looks exactly as it did in my dream. Lots of white doors and old-timey green wallpaper. Nice door trim, etc. Fucking jaw dropped, stunned, couldn't fucking believe it. Fast forward to a few years ago, 20, on the phone with my dad one night. He gets to talking about his mom, start talking about how nice an old house was, you can't get them built like that anymore, etc. Mentioned how the staircase used to always scare the shit out of me as a kid. Said he remembers me being really scared of it every time we would go. Told him about the dream I had, described the demon in detail. He goes, "It's funny that you mentioned that." Oh fuck no. .png. Says one time before I was born he was passing through and stopped to visit mom. Started to rain real fucking bad. He didn't want to be caught up in the road anyway. Apparently the walls were super thick and made in dimensions that they don't really do anymore. And there was brick underneath the wallpaper and a shit ton on the walls. And he could still hear the rain pouring the fuck down. And normally you wouldn't hear rain. Goes to sleep upstairs in a random bedroom. Mom just told him to make himself at home. Sleep. Wakes up at like 2 a.m. Closet is open. Wasn't open before. Just staring into the black mass of the closet. I think he sees movement, like a shadow moving amongst the shadow of the interior. Is really freaked out now. Suddenly, a skull face with spiky black shadow head rises up from the foot of his bed and stares at him. Dad freaks the fuck out, pulls himself up and starts rebuking him in the name of Jesus Christ, etc. Family was Pentecostal and very much so. Goes on and on, shouting, rebuking it for like a minute. It does not move, just stares, unaffected. Some time passes and my dad is just about to fucking lose it. In a deep, growly voice it says,
"I just wanted to make sure,"
and sunk back down. No movement past then, no sound. Just sank past view behind the bed. Dad stayed up until sunlight. Never told anyone about it until he told me that night.
I work for the Bigfoot hunting organization, which is not too dissimilar to the BFRO, but instead of being a group of pussies who think they know what they're doing, unlike the BHO, which is made up of hunters, primatologists, and anthropologists, I'm a hunter and spend most of my time hunting boar down in Texas as my day job. There's a huge population problem throughout the state, but I also lead a team of 2 primatologists and another hunter. We meet up once a month and go on a week-long hunt to a specific location in Washington state, known for its frequent Bigfoot sightings. In the 3 years we've been doing this, we have seen a number of different Bigfoot individuals multiple times, managing to grab photos and even some video, but we're still trying to gather evidence, and the only thing we need now is a body or even a living specimen. Next month, we're going on a 6-week hunt where we hope to get just that, hopefully sooner rather than later. Wish us luck.
Stationed in Korea. Little no-name base, mostly unmanned except for some kind of seismology outpost and a few soldiers doing who knows what, aviation support or something. Small military police force, just a platoon that gets set up on a month-long rotation, but largely a formality as this place is Mayberry and there aren't enough people to get into trouble. On the base are these little hills that dot the post here and there. These are the graves of soldiers killed in the Korean conflict. They were essentially buried where they fell in some areas. Anyway, enough setup. Each shift we need to do a walking patrol. Is the highlight of my shift because being crammed in a car all day blows. Start mine at about 2 AM because once curfew starts, people on base get into stupid situations and now it's my problem. Walking past a cluster of graves. See some guy, he looks back at me and ducks behind one of the mounds. Hey, military police, come out where I can see you. No answer. Assume it's some people and they're just ignoring me. Go around the back of the mounds. Nothing but a short-cut parade field. An area the size of a soccer field, literally impossible to hide in. Radio station. Maine, this is B-110. I'm out at the gravesites with a subject who has fled on foot. Will advise once I found him. No answer. Whatever, radio guy's lazy. Keep looking around but there's nothing to look at. Feel like I'm being watched. Radio comes on again. All units, check radios, hot mic. A hot mic is someone transmitting without being aware, leaning on the button or something. It's gotten colder since I'd been in the area. At this point my something's messed up senses are tingling, so I perform a cursory look around the area and get back to the station. That sergeant is pissed because he thinks I was the one hot micing. All radio traffic records on our computer, so we play back my calls. Mostly white noise. At one point you hear me say, I'm on the scene, followed by more white noise. We turn up the volume. Some of it is hard to hear, but some is surprisingly audible. Sergeant Long. More rounds, more water. In the tree line. There. Clear as a bell. Wasn't supposed to be like this. Sergeant tells me and the radio guy not to mention this to anyone because he doesn't want a bunch of people wandering around the gravesites. Next they have an order to not go near the burial mounds. Don't need to be told that twice.
I was hiking in Florida a few years ago, 2012 I think, when I had my first encounter with a Bigfoot. For those who don't know, Florida has a lot of marshy swamps, and the people to prove it, many of which are protected inside national parks. North to a small town I grew up in, there's a rather large swamp that connects with a few other swamps in the north part of the state. The swamp has a ridge running through it that is a very popular hiking trail among everyone in town. Back when I still lived in town, I would spend pretty much every Sunday hiking through that trail, even if the weather was bad. The Sunday of my encounter, the weather itself was bad. This matters because it had been raining the night before, and as a result, there was a thick and heavy fog in the morning of my hike. Now, I'll admit, it wasn't the best idea to hike through the swamp in a heavy fog, but I really didn't care at the time. I went out anyway. It was around 9:30 in the morning when I made it to the top of the ridge. The fog was still pretty heavy, so I couldn't really see all that far. I was about to turn around when I heard a guttural scream come from right in front of me. I never heard anything like it before, but it shook me to my core. I started backing off slowly away from the sound. When I thought I could see a figure in the fog, at first I was relieved to have another person up here with me, and I was about to approach them and ask if they heard the sound. That's when I heard it again, but this time it was coming from the figure in front of me. I again started backing off slowly. When it started running towards me, I ran and kept running away until I tripped and slid down the ridge into the swamp. I quickly managed to stand and continue to run away from the figure. I managed to get to a nearby gas station where I realized I had broken my foot. A few days later, I left the hospital. One of the police came up to me and said they'd found large footprints where I had my encounter. I can't be sure if it was actually Bigfoot, but honestly, who else would be out there like that? I've since moved to Ohio, where I actually had several more encounters, but maybe I'll share them at a later date if people are interested.
Used to work with an events company. One event took us to downtown Houston, small party at the Houston Library. Anyone that's worked in this sort of job knows you often work split shifts. You set up before the event starts, go home to get some sleep while it's going on, then come back and work overnight to tear it down. Since this one was so small, it was just me and a handful of guys. One of them goes off by himself to take down lights. Let's call him George. George is on a big ladder by an upstairs window pulling lights. Pig related, George is by one of those arched windows on the left-hand side. I'm walking by and George stops me, tells me he hears music inside the building. I listen, and sure enough, I can hear a violin. Figure maybe someone left the radio on? Tell George to just ignore it, it's not our job. But George tells me it's moving. Not sure what he means. George says he's been hearing the music move past him, back and forth. I listen closely. The fucker's right. The sound of the violin is traveling from one window to the next, then back. Fucking ghost music. George is Hispanic and incredibly superstitious, so I tell him to hurry up before El Diablo gets him. Never seen him work so fast, Keck. By the time we're done tearing down, everyone's aware of the ghost violinist. We stand there for a while, staring up at the windows, listening to the music in the dark. Beautiful piece. Still wonder what it is to this day. Find out later the old groundskeeper used to play violin. He and his dog are said to haunt the building. Rest in peace, old timer. You were one hell of a fiddler.
I work as a farmhand, not far from a nearby Native American reserve. It's hard work, but honest, and I wouldn't have it any other way. The only problem I have is the occasional weird thing that usually ends up happening. That usually ends with a blessing from a medicine man from the nearby reserve. The last time this happened was just a few months ago. Despite the whole pandemic going on, the farm still need to work due to the need of food. Anyway, the farm where I work was surrounded by a bunch of other farms, some independent, some owned by big agricultural companies, and some owned by the reserve. That means a lot of people work in the area, despite it mostly being farmland. But it also meant that there was a few months earlier this year where people would disappear. No one knew what happened to those who disappeared, or even how it happened. But it didn't take long for rumors to begin spreading around. I had some friends and fellow farmhands come up with me and say they saw some disfigured coyote run through the cornfields in the days leading up to a disappearance, or some of the cattle herders finding mutilated cows in a tree. I never saw anything personally, but the disappearances ended after a group of medicine men came from the reserves to bless all the farms. Now, I've only just found out about skinwalkers, and while this does seem to fit in with what happened, I can't really be sure. Maybe it was a skinwalker, maybe it was something else. I don't know.
It's not really one story as much as several stories involving the same thing. A lot of these are reports from my co-workers. Be me, working at a shitty overpriced store. Co-workers are pretty cool for the most part. I start out working stock. Shift starts at 5 a.m. before the sun is up. Whole store feels weird at this hour, like we aren't supposed to be there. Shrug it off as me being new to the job. My schedule wasn't working, was trying to do awkwardly timed college classes and this crappy 5 a.m. shift at the same time. Get transferred to sales, am now a day walker as the stock guys call it. Turns out a girl I vaguely knew worked there, became friendly fast. She had to go into the stock room a lot, but always refused to go alone. There's something in there, I can feel it. Laugh it off as her being paranoid. Supervisor goes into the stock room to find whatever item, lights go off. He's very into spiritual shit, so he says to the empty dark room, "If there's any being in here, please show your presence." Fucking door to the stockroom swings wide open. Nobody comes in or is near the entrance. Supervisor nopes the fuck out to the manager's office. Friendly co-worker from before and I are working closing shifts one night. I'm cleaning up from the front of the store while she's on break. Hear her scream from the break room. She's outside the break room staring at the door. Ask what happened, if she's okay. She said the light in the break room went off. She was startled, hence the scream, but figured it was me since I'd like to mess with her as she's easily scared. She leaves the break room and I'm nowhere in sight. She realizes it wasn't me, and the supervisor is in the back counting out the register money. Open door. Light is still off. Flick the switch. It comes back on. Definitely wasn't an electrical problem. Get in one day, again for closing shift. All staff members kinda on edge and asking if I heard what happened. Haven't even punched in yet, of course I haven't. They tell me to ask another coworker. He's also spiritual, like my supervisor. Very dramatic, very gay, but in a tolerable way. Says he used the restroom that morning right before the store opened. As he's doing whatever, maggots start crawling up through the drain in the center, make their way towards the walls, climbing them. Coworker says they moved pretty fast compared to how fast he thought maggots would be. Freaks out, gets store manager. Maggots are still there when he shows them to her. She freaks out too. Don't remember how they cleaned it up and I think poured something down the drain. Working a closing shift again. Store just closed. Haven't really started doing shit. Store gets a phone call from security. Said someone entered our store through the back door. Put on best angry face I can and go to the back with manager and another coworker following. I'm one of the only guys on staff and I'm a big intimidating guy, so it's normal. Look through the entirety of the stock room. Nothing there. Security insists it happened. One night, one of the bottles of a beer flew off the shelf and shattered. This happened a good hour or so after all employees leave. Check security camera footage in the morning. Looks like it was thrown off. It was broken before it hit the ground. Check the glass pieces. There's a source of impact. Appears to have originated from inside the bottle itself. No explanation whatsoever about how it happened. So basically what I'm saying is my store was haunted. You could kind of feel it, but there were times that it just felt foreboding. I'm still mildly afraid to go into that store. Anyways, I don't know if there is even interest in the story, but I'm tired after. So good night, y'all.
BEK encounter in Mexico City, Mexico. Okay guys, this happened to me and my wife 3 years ago, around 1 AM in this location, after exiting a movie. That day, we were pretty broke. I just had money for the movies, but not for the parking. Here in Mexico, all the public parking lots cost, so we decided to park the car behind the shopping mall on a back alley. When we were out of the movie, the shopping mall access to the back alley was closed, so we had to walk our way up to there. When we were about to arrive to the car, a small kid looking around 6 or 7 ages pulled my shirt from behind asking for some spare change. This is something really common in Mexico. There are tons of beggars everywhere. I said, "I'm sorry kid, I'm broke. I have no spare change." The situation smelled fishy, so I opened the car with my remote key and made signs to my wife to enter the car fast. The kid asked again. The whole time he was looking at the floor, and it was a really dark alley, so I wasn't able to see his face clearly. I was using my phone's flashlight to see around. That's when something makes my radar go crazy. I remember the hour. I see on my watch it's 1:33 AM. On my city, no beggar kids are out at this time, especially out on an alley like that, unless they're trying something sketchy, like robbing you, or worse. Without looking back, I rushed inside the car and placed the locks on it. That's when, while viewing the rearview mirror, I saw him staring directly at us. His eyes were like a void, a deep dark black that made all my body enter into a fight or flight stance. A smile so evil that got my heart racing incredibly fast. He ran over to my door and knocked on the glass while staring directly at me, asking for money over and over again. He tried to open the door by pulling the handle restlessly. As soon as he left the handle alone, by a second, I turned on the car and made a run for our safety. The kid started running behind us, almost at the same speed as the car, while screaming at us. Finally, we reached a highly transited avenue, and the kid was nowhere to be seen. Needless to say, my wife and I were both scared shitless. From time to time, we'd drive by there at 1 or 3 AM to try to find the kid again. I've never seen him again. Also, I would like to add, the public illumination service doesn't work in the alley, so it was really hard to see the kid. So ask me anything. My wife was there too. She saw the kid's eyes. It still gives me nightmares to this day.
Living in an older apartment with roommate. He had a cat for a while, was pretty cool. Cat comes into my room most nights to sleep next to me, very comfy. Roommate breaks up with GF, cat goes with her. A few months pass. Start feeling a small creature jump on my bed at night when I'm half asleep. Sometimes feel it slowly walk up and around my bed. Figure it's just a dream/memory of the roommate's former cat. Start to happen when I'm still conscious before falling asleep, or wakes up in the middle of the night and still feel it when I'm fully awake. Never feel afraid, actually feel serene and comforted when it happens. Rational part of me figures it's the mattress springs going out or gust of wind/air pressure changes messing with the blanket. Not fully convinced though, because there's a noticeable bounce when it first happens, then a deliberate pattern of steps which matches pace and manner of a small animal walking. One night I said aloud, "Hey buddy, can you take it easy? I have to get up early." It immediately stops. Get a new GF. She stays over one night. She wakes me from sleep, shaking me urgently. "Anon, what is that? Is something on the bed?" We both feel a small creature walking around. We both see small indentations being made on top of the blanket. Ask it to just rest because we're trying to sleep. Movement stops. Overall, it was a pleasant experience. I'm not sure exactly what it was, but it was never frightening. Lots of other paranormal events happened at that apartment, experienced by multiple people. I would also have frequent, pleasant dreams of glowing geometric shapes or beautifully colored UFOs appearing outside of my window. The dreams would end with a deluge of information flowing into my mind. I couldn't make out most of it, but always left me with a feeling that reality was more complex and beautiful than we are capable of consciously understanding.
Hey everyone, first post here. I didn't realize there was a subreddit for this, and I thought I'd post my experience, since I thought the girl that visited me was actually a good spirit trying to help. In my early 20s, I had a recurring dream with sleep paralysis. I live in a city, and would be driving my car around, but noticed a strange white van with tinted windows following me. The sky was all white, and no other cars were on the road. I'd pull into my driveway and run inside, run down the hallway and hide under my blankets. I'd then proceed to wake up in my bed, hearing a knock on the screen door. It was a young girl with black hair, a pale face, and black eyes. She'd have her hands desperately pressed into the screen. I'd freak out, then actually wake up in my bed. This dream went away. Fast forward many years later, and I've noticed this white van following me on walks. Recalling my dream, I didn't want him to know where I live, or my routine, and changed it. I thought maybe this was a dream that was warning me of this creepy stalker in advance. And maybe this being helped me out to warn me of a potential fear in the future.
I think I found a fake town last year. Like Truman Show fake. Be me. Last summer. Cross-country road trip hitting up some national parks for out. In central/southern Utah. It's getting late, like 10 p.m. Been driving since 6-ish. It's dark as fuck. No moon. Can only see what's lit up by my headlights. Decide to head someplace to rest for the night at the next exit. See a town off in the distance, turn off on only pull off I've ever seen for over an hour heading towards town. Pull off is unmarked and unlit, not on car GPS, no cell service. Town is directly ahead though, keep going. Road turns to dirt road and is about 5 miles until it turns to pavement again. Road turns to dirt road and is about 5 miles until it turns to pavement again. Right at the town where businesses and houses start showing up. Immediately town strikes me as weird. Nobody is on the streets, no cars on the streets or in the businesses' parking lots. Jazz music is being pumped through the streets for some reason. Not loudly, but loud enough to hear. This town that looked to be about 7 blocks wide for some miles out has every major fast food chain I've ever heard of and 7 hotels on the main street. Still no cell service, still not on the car GPS. KFC was fully illuminated and unlocked, nobody there. Same thing with Jack in the Box. McDonald's has a cashier and cook when I go there. Both look annoyed. Take my order, give me distinctly non-McDonald's nuggets and fries. Leave. Start going to get a bed for the night. Hampton Inn, empty parking lot. Third annoyed looking person informs me they're all booked up. La Quinta. Person I'm now convinced was the cook at McDonald's is behind the check-in counter. Also empty parking lot. Also fully booked. Holiday Inn Express. Empty parking lot. Person that was clearly the fucking cashier at McDonald's is behind the check-in counter. Surprisingly, they have rooms. Ask him if he's the guy from McDonald's. Nah, that's my brother. Fuck it. Good enough for me. Get to room. Wi-Fi exists, but nothing loads. Shower, crash. Wake up next day. No breakfast in lobby, no other guest. McDonald's guy is still there for checkout. Ask him how to get out of town. Same road you came in on. Head to McDonald's to get something to eat. Town is still playing smooth jazz. Still nobody on the street. Order at drive-thru. Drive-thru lady is definitely lady from the Hampton Inn. Ordered a fucking McGriddle and black coffee. She hands me a microwave English muffin sandwich and what I assume to be some kind of instant coffee. Place is too fucking weird to stay and argue. Heading down to the only fucking road in and out of town. Maybe 3 miles onto the 5-mile dirt road, notice big metal wire fence on both sides of the road in the desert, meet on the road in a big motorized gate that is open. Soon as I pass through, gate starts closing. Get back onto the road. Finally get on 62. That's not right. I could have sworn I was on 89 when I pulled off and there's mountains in between. Finally get cell service. Nothing matches description of town. None of the charges ever show up on my card. I've told some people, and one suggested it was Richfield, but I know I was south of there, and they would have actually charged me for stuff.
Stumbled across this sub. Figured I'd drop my experience for the record. I didn't know there was a whole community dedicated to these sightings, but figured I'll contribute. About 6 months ago or so, in South Texas, I was visiting family in a decently sized RV park in a rundown side of town. It was maybe 10 p.m. or so at the time, and the dog had to go out. My dog only does his business at the end of the street, in a buddy of mine's lawn, and has issues passing due to a tumor in his back end. So I always stop at the end of the street and kinda watch the stars and stuff. Well, I looked down the street, near the entrance to the park, and under the lonesome streetlight, I saw a silhouette of a kid, maybe 9, 12, just standing there, almost in a T-pose, but not quite. The odd thing I noticed was his hands, which were open enough where it was like a crab in a sense, that you could see the thumb, etc. And fingers had zero movement. I was puzzled trying to find out how this figure was so dark under the streetlight, though it was literally like seeing someone just enough to make out the outline in darkness. Zero light was reflected on this kid, just utter darkness. The only thing I could think was that someone was pulling a random prank and actually put a cutout or a mannequin even in the middle of the road, but again, was still confused how it remained so pitch black directly under a source of light. I didn't walk up to it because of 2 reasons. One, being my dog, who was still straining trying to go potty, and second, I have a keen sense of picking up on negative energy. It was the same vibe I felt in the haunted house I grew up in, where I had several spiritual encounters. I sat there for more than a few minutes, just focusing on fine points of the silhouette, looking for the slightest pinch of movement, but never saw it. It was at this time I figured I'd pull my phone out and try to zoom in on this figure, but oddly enough, the screen in my camera mode was pitch black, so I couldn't make anything out, and when I did zoom up to where I surely thought the figure was, I saw nothing but the street light through the lens. A couple actually began to walk behind this kid around the time I noticed. They didn't even glance or acknowledge the kid standing there, maybe 6 feet or less. Then, as they walked by, and what was super weird was, as they passed under the streetlight, you could make out everything from facial features down to the clothes they were wearing, but the kid remained solid black. They were walking their dog, and even the dog didn't seem to notice, which was odd, reflecting upon this now. I gave up, glanced down to put my phone back in my pocket, and I looked up, and the figure was gone. It just vanished for a second or two of looking away. At this point, I was getting really confused and just wanted to get home. The creepy factor was through the roof. I turned around and began to walk back, when all of a sudden, fast-paced running came up behind me. Startled, but trying to keep my composure, I quickly turned around and saw this gray blur zoom past. The thing that stuck out most, for sure, was the very gray skin, and what I swear was black eyes, from just a slight bit of eye contact I had. Then, right as the kid passed, he says, "Ha, I scared you." And boom, dude's gone, just like that. Poof. By the time I got home, I began researching what this area has as far as legends, etc. go, and stumbled across BEKs. I guess Texas is really aware of BEKs, and has several sightings, starting from some dude in Abilene, who was a reporter. It wasn't until I put some work in and did some further research and talked to other Redditors before I became totally convinced that this had been some kind of BEK encounter.
Sick one day when I was 4. Mother goes to chemist to pick up my prescription. Gives name and address or whatever. Has a quick check of it. Takes me home. Opens prescription at home and it's something I'm allergic to. Checks patient's deets on it. Same name, same date of birth, except the year is 1 out. Address is very similar. Not gonna post my real address, but it was like 56 Adam Street and 56 Adam Street. Has to take prescription back. This happens off and on for years with my prescriptions getting mixed up with my imposters, or I'm his imposters. He was a year older than me. When I was 11, I went to secondary school. Line up for meme tickets. You just have to give them your name and date of birth, then they cross you off the list. Do that. Start getting berated by the teacher for trying to trick them into giving me extra tickets. This is the first time I've seen you. You were here 5 minutes ago. Shows me list with my name crossed out. Point out that birth year is 1 out. Realize he's in the same fucking school as me. Random people come up to me mistaking me for him, not just because of the name, but because we look so similar. Teachers ask me all the time if we're related. Despite being in the same school as him for 4 years and only living maybe 10 minutes apart, I never once see him. Forget about it after that. When I was about 20, I went to the chemist myself to pick up a prescription. Give name and address. Didn't I just give that to you? No. Pharmacist mentions it's an odd coincidence that me and the imposter were there at the same time. She looks out the window, looks out too. See him walking past. He's absolutely identical to me in every way. Never see him again after that. Such a weird experience.
Glass eyes, the gentle hum of the engine, attempted to lull me to sleep as I slowly chugged back to my hometown, my only company being my hefty duffel bag overflowing with half-opened Christmas gifts. With every turn, it threatened to dump its contents onto my lap. I gazed helplessly as a battalion of white specks dove at the windshield, desperate to join their comrades, only to get swept off by the windshield wiper. A distant wall of gargantuan skyscrapers illuminated the horizon, acting as a beacon home. My gaze hung on the roadside, searching for an exit that would assist me towards home. Eventually, an emptiness in the trees allowed me to progress. I sluggishly rotated the steering wheel and headed towards the city. A meager cluster of shapes suddenly broke the darkness. I approached cautiously, waiting for more details to materialize on the shapes. As I grew closer, my eyes identified 11 dead deer laid lifelessly in a perfect circle. The macabre display interrupted my journey. My rusted machine sputtered to a halt. I withdrew from my rust bucket to further inspect the cadavers. There were no holes, marks, or fluids that indicated a cause of death. I knelt down next to one of the corpses, my morbid curiosity leading me to closer inspection. Its glassy eyes stared lifelessly into the void. Its delicate mouth hung without emotion, its legs twisted and contorted in impossible ways. I barely managed to suppress a snake of bile from slithering out my throat. I fought feebly for an ounce of oxygen. What fate had befallen these beautiful creatures, and why were they in a perfect circle? How were they in a perfect circle? Thoughts buzzed around my mind like enraged hornets. I convinced myself to just jump in my car and book it. A pair of shambling legs escorted me to my rust bucket. As I hauled myself into the car, I glimpsed something in my side mirror. 11 deer now stood bolt straight up, staring daggers into the back of my head. They seemed unfazed by whatever previous injury they had incurred. Their motionless eyes glowed their spotlights. Before I could draw another struggled breath, my foot collided with the accelerator, launching me down the road. The deer were miles behind me, but never out of sight. I could never forget those eyes. Those eyes visited me every night. It became routine. I would drift off into a nonsensical plane of my mind, only to be greeted by those eyes. They stared without conviction. I could never escape them. Never.
Visiting Chinatown. Alone as usual. Pop into a dumpling shop, and on this particular day, it's pretty dead. Normally, it's bustling. Order a fuck ton of pork and soup dumplings, and the waitress disappears into the kitchen. As I wait for my food, I look around and notice that the only people in the restaurant are me, an old couple in the corner, and one Asian businessman on his phone. The old couple is eyeing me strangely. I nod and smile, but they look away. Service bell dings. Here comes my food, yes! Look over at the double doors leading to the kitchen. They open and I watch as my tray of food makes its way over to me, balanced delicately on a raised arm of a big fat frog in a smock? I glance around. The fuck is this? Old couple is scowling at me now. Asian businessman doesn't even seem to notice. He's glued to his phone. The frog person walks up to my table, drops off my food. He's just barely tall enough to do this, then turns around and walks back into the kitchen, just like a little person. A few moments of disbelief pass. Old couple still scowling. Asian businessman gets up and leaves. After a while, hunger takes over and I simply chow down. I had never had, and to this day have not had, such fucking delicious dumplings. I ordered enough to take home with me, but ended up eating everything and my plates were totally clean. Never seen the frog again, but leave generous tip when I pay my tab. Thank you, my amphibious friend, whoever you are.
I'm a 21-year-old female, and this story took place when I was around 11. I remember this day clearly because it was the first time I was ever allowed to walk home and back by myself. Up until the age of 14, I lived in what we thought was a safe place in Chautauqua County, New York. Everyone knew everyone. if you thought you would get away with something, then be prepared to have your ear abused by the time you got home. There was this one day though. It was a cold winter day and school was unfortunately still open, so all neighborhood kids had to walk through knee-high inches of snow just to get to school. It took me longer to leave the house, as I was used to walking with my older sister to school since she knew all the routes better than me. I always used to make fun of her for being so paranoid and taking different routes every day from school, but after that day, I learned that was what saved my life. As I was waiting by the door to leave, my mom came up to me and told me that I should ride with her to drop me off because my sister got too sick to go today. Being a brat, I made a big deal about walking by myself because I was almost 12 years old and all my friends' parents let them walk alone. She looked at me for a long while, then told me to make sure I pay attention to cars. I got hit by a car and almost died when I was 9, so the worry that showed on her face was well warranted. I hurriedly nodded and headed out the door to go to school. My sister didn't like to dilly-dally, so she was always in a rush to get to school early, but seeing as it was just me, I thought it would be a good idea to take my time. I would play with the brown slush that was left on the side of the road, and even make funny looking snowballs to see how far I could throw them. Halfway to school, I noticed a white van following behind me. Being the playful child I was, if I had not been bending down to make another snowball, I wouldn't have noticed it slowly creeping up the street. I told myself I was being stupid, but continued more hurriedly to school. Once I got to school, I took a quick glance over my shoulder and saw the van a few feet behind me. It wasn't until I got to school grounds that it drove away fast by me. I thought that it would be the end of it, but throughout the day I would stare out the window. The van would be there. I assumed that it never really left, just parked. Many adults would try to convince me years later that maybe it wasn't the same one, but I knew it was. The van had a bright yellow big smile sticker on it. I couldn't see who was in the van, but through the tinted glass, I knew they could see me. It was now the end of the day, and I wasn't ready to go home. It was too late to call my mom, because she was at work and my sister was homesick. I had to suck it up and started walking home. I tried to blend in with a group of kids, but most of them were car riders, and the others didn't live near me. Remembering what my sister told me, I took another route home. I didn't memorize the route clearly, but I decided anything was better than being spotted by the van. I made it to my main street, but realized my mistake was too late. The route I took led back to the main street, where I walked to school. Hidden behind a row of cars was the white van, with the smiley emoji sticker. I tried to stay calm and walk past it, but once I heard the van door silently click open, I ran. I could hear the rush of 2 pairs of heavy footfalls behind me. They were getting closer, so I did what any normal kid would do. I cut corners. I cut into someone's backyard until I was directly in sight of my house, and forced myself into the thick snow to make it into the door. My heart was racing, not because I was running, but because I could still hear them behind me. I made it into the door and banged with all my might until someone came to the door. My sister looked confused, but one look at my face, and she pulled me inside and locked the doors. The van was still outside. Truthfully, it stayed out there until my brother got home. Me and my sister don't talk about it, but we both knew how close it was to me going missing. I hadn't thought about this incident for years, but one of my hometown friends showed me an article that came out in 2013. Apparently some men kidnapped and sexually assaulted a girl my age. It wouldn't have scared me if they hadn't mentioned the white van. Whoever you are that attempted to kidnap me, and do God knows what else, let's not meet.
Time for some fucking OC. I don't even give a shit if anyone believes me, I just want to get it off my chest. Live in boonies, basically forest, gerrymandered by houses and farms that go in and out of repair. There are several houses right by mine, but I talk to the neighbors exactly none. In fact, I'm glad for it because the community looks like some straight up Silent Hill shit sometimes. There's likely a weekly spoopy happening to the point where I get so bored with it I just shrug it off as the status quo. Several weeks back, this changed. The time is 10 AM and I'm savoring being a lazy fuck for not having to go into work that day, drifting in and out of sleep. Suddenly, ear-splitting roar. All of my what? Check laptop. I do comedy YouTube playlists to help me get to sleep. Just music tends to put me on edge for whatever reason, to see if it's an ad. No ad playing. Halfway through 2-hour video, nothing in Darkseid 2 makes the sound I just heard. Even if it had been, something that loud would have blown out my laptop's rather shitty speakers. Slightly confused, turn off pending alarm and drift in out of consciousness with laptop on bed so I can roll over and check it if I hear it again. 2 hours later, halfway conscious. Skrunk! Motherfucker, forget about me? The roar both sounded louder and closer, as well as clearer. It sounded like the bastard child of a bear roar and that foghorn cry Godzilla makes. Tactically what? Sounded like it came from behind the house. Decide I'm not sleeping until I find out what made that noise. Grab lightly ruined oak hiking staff. Grab fireplace poker. Bathe both in ash, as whatever the fuck made that noise was clearly not of this fucking earth anyways. Trek in the woods. Check glove compass to double check I haven't been turned around like I had before in the same woods. Glove compass is going beyond fucking nuts, spinning like a top, occasionally pointing towards the direction of a clearing I visited before with my friends. I am clearly sane, rational, and a level-headed individual, so obviously I go towards the noise. As I get closer, hear thrashing in the clearing, as well as a cow. There's a dairy farm next to my house, but I don't recall Farmer Dan breeding fucking mutants. Start to see that shit's clearly off. Large movement through the gaps in the tree line. Low rumbling sound. Unnatural heat. Suddenly very glad I hadn't changed out of my sleep shorts. Occasional burn mark on the ground. Yes, I am that retard in the horror movie that moves towards the live hellmouth apparently. Eventually get to clearing to see what the ruckus is about. Peek out from behind tree. It's a fuck mothering dragon. Or at least, that's what I'm fucking assuming. Think less Tolkien, more Lovecraft. It had pale gray skin that looked like boiled cognac, to the point where it appeared actively wet. It was hexapedal, balanced on 6 squat legs that looked like an elephant's more than anything. There were a pair of massive wings on its back that looked like they could actually lift the monstrosity off the ground. Even folded, they seemed beyond massive. Its tail looked like it had been stumped, not in the way that it had been cut off, but there was some sort of bulbous mass where the tail was supposed to continue. And then there was its head and neck. It was like some kind of fucked up xenomorph. Recesses where its eyes obviously should have been, but they seemed to have skin over them. Yellow teeth sticking out its closed maw on both sides, painted red with the gore of the cow I had just finished eating. And that's when my brain got a chance to catch up from the holy fuck dragon and got a chance to look at the rest of the clearing. It was totally scorched, like basically everything was blackened. Hear snapping noise in the woods roughly to the left of me. Dragon looks up. Its head is pointed in a decidedly uncomfortable at me direction. Hide behind tree. What smells like ozone? Suddenly, rushing sound, like a dam burst. About to look from behind the tree, but my judgment gets the best of me. Good fucking thing. Because I suddenly feel myself a yard from a large stream of aggressive something. To this day, I can't figure out what it was exactly. Going out of GREENTEXT here for a second. It didn't seem to be exactly fire or a flammable substance. The movement was too jerky. But it didn't spark or crackle like electricity, and I still have the right half of my body, so I'm guessing it wasn't plasma. But it was sure as fuck burning anything it touched. A spark got kicked up and burnt a sizable hole in my shirt. Begin tactically praying in Old Norse once the fire dies down. Figure I'm not escaping, so might as well go out fighting. Jump out from behind the tree, ready to suicide charge a dragon. Hear rustling from the same spot as before. Boom. Same roar as before, followed by some decidedly unpleasant shrieking. Large gaping hole opened in eye recess. Hear shouting. Get the fuck away from my cows, you fucker. Holy shit, it's Farmer Dan. Not looking at him, focusing on Big Fucker. It unfurls its wings and starts flapping. Takes to the sky with surprising expediency for something that had a torso the size of an RV. It certainly felt like a large aircraft had just taken off. I was nearly bowled over from the force of the wind. It circles in the air once before heading towards the lake. Stand there for a moment, just plain vanilla dumbfounded. More movement. Brandish fireplace poker. Farmer Dan is now about 10 feet from me. The gun in his hand looks like an old-style break action, but the barrels were ridiculously large in diameter. My brain finally processes the fact that I'm being questioned. Anon, what the fuck do you think you're doing out here? Try my hardest to point out that is not the most important question to be asked in this situation. Finally coax an answer out of him. Apparently several of his longhorns went missing from the pasture, and he caught sight of it moving to the clearing after one more had disappeared. Hunter friends had apparently reported some weird goings on in the backwoods to him. Said they found some freaky shit and some big ass nest. Only one dead cow in the clearing, however, and no nest to be seen. My brain refused to examine the possible meaning of those facts at the time. Ask him about the gun. Says he uses it to hunt whatever goes after his cows. The inflection implied that this was not the first supernatural entity he'd shot at using this shotgun. Farmer Dan stops me before I get back on the path. Don't tell nobody about this, Anon. No use causing a fuss over some fairy tale nonsense. I am not about to disagree with a man holding what I can only assume is a 2 or less gauge. Walk back home and fall asleep. Wake up later that day assuming it was all some sort of fucked up dream. Look down and notice hole in shirt was legitimately there. Brain reeling for not dragon related answers. Half-heartedly settle on this somehow being the shirt I'd burned slightly during a bonfire several years beforehand. Forced to confront reality when I noticed said shirt lying on the ground. Decide then and there I'm moving to the largest city I can get so I don't have to deal with this bullshit anymore. There was a huge rainstorm the next day so a lot of the char was washed out. But sure the fuck enough, when I went back to the clearing several days later, it was filled with morel mushrooms. I don't know what the fuck I saw, and I don't know if Kay would have any better idea of what it was. But if I ever know that thing's in my area again, I'm finding as many commandos as possible and leading reality's probably first dragon slaying raid.
When I was a little kid, growing up in a very small town in the 80s and 90s, my parents often left me and my little sister home alone for a few hours at a time to run errands. My mom had 2 brothers, and we lived in the same town as one of her brothers and his family. Being a close-knit family, my cousins and I were always over at each other's houses. The adults would leave us alone a lot. Back then, it was standard to tell kids, don't open the doors for anyone, and don't use the stove. And we never thought anything about it. After my parents divorced, it happened more often, as both my parents worked different shifts at their jobs. My sister and I lived in town, and my cousins and grandma lived outside of town, with only a few neighbors nearby. So my sister and I got best of both worlds, city kids and country kids. Because we lived in a small community, everyone knew everyone else. And I think we all felt pretty safe that nothing bad would ever happen. And if it did, our neighbors would help us. Around the time I was 8 or 9 years old, I began to get strange phone calls. It was a man's voice on the phone, and these calls would almost always come when I was home alone. This person would tell me they could see me, that they knew I was alone, and that they were coming to get me. When I'd get these calls, I'd usually just hang up without saying anything. Of course it terrified me, but I was too scared to tell my parents. I was scared by the calls, but I also liked getting to stay home alone. Being left to take care of my sister made me feel grown, and I didn't want my parents to stop leaving me in charge. Stupidly, I kept the calls to myself. One day, when my dad was at work, my cousin, who was a year older than me, was at my house. We were watching TV and playing when the phone rang. She answered it and her face went pale. She hung up and started crying. I immediately asked her what was wrong, and she shook her head, saying, "I can't tell you." I pressed, and she finally told me about how this man would call her a lot when she was home alone, always telling her he knew she was by herself and he was going to come get her. I was shocked. I explained that I had been getting the same calls, and we immediately agreed that it had to be one of her older brothers or their friends playing a mean joke on us. We calmed down and kinda laughed it off. I didn't get another call for a while. After that, I almost forgot about it. In the summer between my 6th and 7th grade year, my grandma had taken a part-time job and my mom lived in another town. So my sister and I were home alone almost all day every day while my dad worked. We spent our days outside playing in the yard, riding bikes around the neighborhood, and tanning in our backyard a lot. One day my sister had gone to a friend's and my cousin was back at my house. We were listening to music and dancing around the living room when the phone rang. I picked it up and there it was, the voice. At this point I was 12 years old and I had developed a little bit of an attitude. When the man told me he knew we were home alone, I laughed and said, "Liar." He waited a moment and said, "I can prove that I know you're home alone." I laughed again, a little more nervously this time, and I said, "Oh yeah? Then do it." His response was, "I love that little yellow tank top you're wearing today." By this time, my cousin had turned off the music and was watching me, so she saw the color drain out of my face. I was freaking out. I had just gotten a new outfit and was wearing it, a yellow tank top and jean shorts with matching yellow and pink patches. I yelled, "Leave us alone," and slammed the phone down. My heart racing, I started crying. I told my cousin. It was him. He knows we're here by ourselves. I ran over and shut the living room curtains, and my cousin said, "I think we should call somebody." I agreed, but instead of calling the police, she picked up the phone and tried calling her mom at work. We got no answer. I called my dad's work and left a message with the gate guard to have him call me. As we were debating what to do next, I hear the gravel in our driveway crunch under the wheels of a vehicle. I ran to the window and peeked out to see a small red car sitting in the driveway. I didn't recognize the car, and I didn't recognize the man and woman inside it. In our tiny little town, even if I didn't know someone's name, I'd surely know their face, but I didn't know either one of them. I froze with fear as I watched them talking to each other, and my cousin ran to lock the back door. We had no weapons, and no real way to try to defend ourselves, other than a softball bat, which was outside on the carport. As my cousin came back into the room, she hissed, "We have to hide." My cousin hid in a small space between the tall bookshelf and the wall. I threw myself between our recliner, which faced the window. I watched in horror as the woman walked up to the front door. Instead of knocking, she tried the knob. I tried to quiet my breathing, convinced she might be able to hear me, and watched her shadow through the curtains as she walked around our carport. Surely enough, I heard the doorknob jiggle. There was a pause, and then the door shook, as if someone was trying to force it open. I covered my mouth and forced myself not to scream. After what felt like an eternity, the sound stopped and everything went quiet. I was too afraid to move, so I just waited. I had no idea how much time passed, but eventually we heard the car backing out of our driveway. Once I got the courage, I ran out to peek out the window again to make sure they really left. I saw no trace of the red car, but I was still racked with fear. I told my cousin she could come out, and we hugged each other in relief. Even though we were scared to go outside, we decided to get on our bikes and ride to the office my aunt worked in. Once we were there, we told her everything, the phone calls and how long they'd been happening, the red car and the description of both people inside. She immediately called the police, and we had to give our statements about it all. When my dad got home from work, he asked me why I'd called the gate guard, and my aunt filled him in on everything. And from that moment on, we weren't allowed to stay by ourselves again, until I was probably 16. We never heard anything else on the case, and we also never got any more phone calls again. It's been years, and I still think about the situation often. We never found out who made those calls, or who those people in the red car were. The phone calls could have just been some mean prank, and those people could have just been trying to simply rob the house or something. But the coincidence that day was crazy. I have no idea if the man kept watching us as we grew up, but the whole thing definitely made me paranoid about a lot of things. And I always make sure to keep a weapon near me at all times when home alone. Now, a single mom, I am forced to leave my kids alone occasionally, and I am overly protective with them, giving tons of instructions and rules about what they can and can't do. They roll their eyes at me, but I know the dangers of the world, and I'd rather be safe than sorry. So, to the man and the couple in the red car, let's not ever meet.
I don't even give a fuck if you believe me. This sounds unreal, more like a dream I had, and nobody else believes me, but you guys are more trained in the occult bullshit, so what the fuck? Be me, 19, visiting my grandfather in northern Michigan. A bit of a backstory about my gramps. Grandpa lives in a cabin like a pioneer. I never really knew him too well, only saw him once every few years. All I really know about him is back in the 70s, he was a knob. When I was 17, he confessed to me that he felt terrible about the things he had to do there. Apparently beat a kid to death with a shovel. After that, I kind of avoided him. Too freaked out to talk to him, especially since he was clearly unstable. Old guilt caught up with him. Now he knows he's nearing the end of his life, liver problems, refuses medication. Invited me over since I'm his last living relative and he wants to spend time with me before he passes. At first I was hesitant, but I decided this is what my father would have wanted. After about 3 hours of driving, I get to his cabin. Nice place, looks like it's made of linking logs. He's waiting outside on his cabin porch, smoking a pipe in a rocking chair. Looks straight out of a cartoon, suspenders and all. Looks exhausted, dark circles under his saggy eyes. He gets up and gives me a bear hug. He's trying to hug me as hard as he can, but he's clearly weak. We hug for a few minutes, mostly because I find it too awkward to break away. I remind myself that even though I only remember him for a few years, he's known me most of his life. Halfway throughout, he starts kind of breathing heavy on me. Sniffles. Realize he's been crying silently. Eventually he breaks away, red-eyed. "Come on in, Anon." "Okay, Pa." Come inside a very cozy cabin. It is getting cold, especially in Michigan, so he has the fire going. He has running water, a gas stove, and 2 beds. One of them is very new and quality. I think he bought it just for me. When I get over the initial off-puttingness of his behavior, I begin to care for him. I kind of remember my grandfather, if that makes sense. The bond of family becomes newly important. Decide to be his live-in helper until he dies that very day. He starts to make us decaf, but halfway through he starts to sweat. I help him in his chair by the fire and finish the coffee. The coffee tastes like shit, but it's still very appreciative. Assures me that it's delicious. After the decaf, we get ready for bed. He lies on a beat up small bed and tells me to sleep on the new one. When I tell him we should switch, he refuses. I guess he did buy it for me. He says his prayers and falls asleep. I can't stand watching this dying old man, my own flesh and blood, sleeping on that pile of junk. He's quite small and frail at this age, though not thin. With a bit of effort, I manage to lift him up gently and tuck him into the big bed. Move the small bed to the window, make sure to sleep facing it. That way the sun wakes me up. When the sun wakes me up, it's like 6 a.m. I slid the bed back and switched my grandpa back, lay on the good bed for another 20 minutes before I realized I can't fall asleep. All that lifting woke me up. Decided to just prepare breakfast and pack his pipe for him. Go to an outhouse near his cabin because flushing might wake him up. When I'm done, I step outside. Notice something behind his cabin. It seemed to be a gate holding 6 black horses. They're shackled to massive chains. Each horse has a huge metal ring around their necks. They're all chained together and all to the ground. Since it's like 6 a.m. and the forest is dark, they look creepy as hell. I thought it might have been a trick of the light, but their faces looked fucked up. Pig related. It's a horse skull. You know how horses don't look like that skull? They did. Their eyes looked almost red. I thought it might be a reflection, like how cameras show red pupils. God, I was wrong. Stepped back inside to find Grandpa awake sitting on his bed. Talked about what we were gonna do for the day. Said his back felt good enough today that he might want to do some fishing. Not to stroke my own ego, but I attribute that to me letting him sleep on the good bed. Let me tell you, he might as well have been sleeping on the floor. Whatever. After breakfast of eggs and bacon, I drive him to the pond near the house. We fish for a while, silent the entire time. It wasn't awkward though, it was a comfortable silence. I didn't catch anything, but he caught a 3-pounder. Had to help him reel it in. Was very proud of himself, and that made me happy. Said he used to love to go out fishing. Told him we would make it into dinner. On the drive back, I asked him about the horses. I'd kind of forgotten about them since early morning. Instantly, I knew I shouldn't have asked him. His cheerful smile was replaced with a kind of stern grin. He looked like he was forcing himself to maintain a rapidly fleeting smile. Told me not to worry about it, they were just some pets. I almost listened to him, except he nervously quivered when he said, "worry." Never happened before or after, so I thought it was just an old man thing. When we got back, he showed me how to gut and debone a fish. Marinated it in a dry rub for about 30 minutes while we took a break to puff on his pipe. While he was doing that, I opened the curtains to the back window and peered at the horses. They hadn't moved at all. They hadn't eaten or slept. They didn't look cold, but they were still shooting hot breath from their nose. I know because it was cold. I saw it. I stepped outside to talk to my grandpa about the horses. "Pa, did you forget to feed the horses or something?" "You don't feed those types of horses, son." I had no clue what he meant, but every time I tried to ask him, he would just ignore me and change the subject. When he was done, we stepped inside and had our dinner. I noticed he prayed extra long that night. Fast forward to the next morning, I just woke up with the sun and put my grandpa back into his bed. Decided to get a bit closer to the horses this time. Got just barely close enough so I could see them. I don't think they noticed me. Christ, remembering it now sends shivers down my spine. Just as terrifying as I initially thought, if not more so. Shaggy, matted fur, deformed, bent out of shape skulls. I know 100% their ribcage should have not been indented like that. Their teeth looked like they had been chewing on rocks or something. It wasn't just their appearance though. I've been around deformed animals before, it doesn't really bother me so much. They had a fucked up presence. Like the feeling in your stomach after you watch some fucked up gore. Initially, I had felt bad for them, but now I just wanted them to die. Strangely, however, I also wanted to get closer. Just being around them made me weak in my knees. I couldn't do it. One of them looked me in the eyes, and if I hadn't just used the bathroom, I would have shit myself. Ran back in the cabin and hid. Grandpa was just starting to awake, so I tried to just forget about it and get to work. Today was supplies day, meaning we were gonna have to go into town, refill on food, firewood, toiletries, etc. I decided to buy Grandpa a cake too. Not for any special reason, just that it's important to have some fun when we could. Usually he just got someone to deliver him food, but it was good to get some exercise. Plus, his back was feeling fine. We rode into town and Grandpa said he was getting sick. Poor guy hadn't been in the car for a while. Motion sickness got them and we had to pull over. After that, I realized we had to go quick. We got to a giant, except they called him something else here, good and plenty, something like that. Pick everything up. I hid the cake from Grandpa to surprise him when we got back to the cabin. When we get back, something is wrong. I feel that same stomach feeling. There's a fucking racket coming from the back of the cabin. I pull up the car and step outside. The horses are going nuts. Littered on the floor behind them are some white balls. Grandpa tells me very sternly, get in the cabin. Shouldn't we drive away? Son, the worst thing we could do right now is try and escape. I have no clue what the fuck he's on about. When we get inside, he starts explaining. Remember that he's an old man and he's injured, so I can hardly understand him. He starts talking about how he didn't know they were there when he bought the cabin. If he leaves, he's gonna die. They must have eaten something. From what I could piece together, if you feed them, they get stronger, and they can lure things in better. One of them got a bite. They got enough strength to lure in more and more. The most we can hope is they run out of things that snap. A loud fucking crack like a whip snaps through the air. Grandpa goes silent. What the fuck was that, Pa? He stares at me, kind of empty like. Looking back at it, he was accepting death. One of them broke the chains. What the fuck? What the fuck? What the fuck? Pa looks at me with a kind of pain in his eyes. Behind you. I whip around facing the building. You're a good kid, Sonny. Lose consciousness in a second. I come to with the sun beaming on my face. Wake up in a pile of my own blood. Crowbar at my side. My head aches like fuck. I touch the back of my head. Just a flesh wound. I pick myself up and try not to vomit. Fail. I sit down and try to come to. Everything aches. I'm freezing. Wait. Why am I freezing? The right wall of the cabin is full of holes. Like someone threw boulders through there. What the fuck? Where's Grandpa? No fucking sign of him. In fact, no sign of anything. I open the door and step outside. Check behind. The gates have been trampled. The chains are broken. I get closer. The white things were crushed up rabbits. The horses half chewed them and spit them out. Start to piece everything together. Promptly vomit again. Long story short, I walked back to the cabin and picked a few things. I picked up my grandpa's pipe and his bluegrass tobacco. Found a golden cross that he kept hidden in the cabinet. Drive home without stopping. Next day I called the delivery boy and asked him to deliver to the house so I could see if I dreamed the whole thing. He told me the house was burned down. Guys, I have no idea what the fuck happened that day. I'm sitting here and smoking his pipe. It's honestly the only proof that any of this happened. My therapist can't explain it since I have physical evidence. My priest can't explain it since there's no record of demon horses or anything as far as we know. My friend tells me I'm full of shit. I don't know who else to turn to. Guys, help me.
Hey y'all. Okay, I was told this by a friend who lived down in southern Utah on the Navajo res. He would come up to visit sometimes. Anyway, he was up visiting and had to tell us about something that happened to his uncle very recently. His uncle also lives on the res. Earlier that week, friend's uncle was leaving his house after dark, heading to the large gas station by the interstate, when he passed a young woman walking by the road. Uncle pulled over and asked if she wanted a ride somewhere. She got in his car, then he asked where she was going, but she didn't say anything. Uncle informed her that he was going to the gas station, so she could call someone from there. After driving a few minutes, Uncle felt that he was being watched. He looked over and this girl was staring at him with a very creepy smile on her face. So he reached up and flicked on the dome light in his car. The girl had deer legs. Uncle pulled over, reached over her lap, opened the door and told her to get out. She got out the car and was laughing like a crazy person. As she hopped off into the darkness, Uncle just closed the door and continued on his way. This isn't his first encounter.
Creepy deep web stories. I have a few. If y'all like this one, I'll post more. Be 2 years ago, dicking around with Polish friend. Head into Hidden Wiki, Anonchan, etc. On Anonchan, some dude posted a link of some Cyrillic script with lots of exclamation points. Luckily enough, my buddy reads Russian. Translates it. It's up again, hurry. Fuck it, why not? Click the link. Here's what we saw. 3 dudes in military uniforms, shown only from the neck down, speaking excitedly and super high-pitched / nervously in Russian. Friend reads Russian better than he speaks it, but he catches a few phrases. Basically, these guys are scared and excited, they're getting another one, etc. Eventually, it becomes clear that they're out on ice in some random-ass lake in Siberia, ice fishing. After a few minutes of nervous chatter, fucking assault rifles start going off. Camera swings around wildly, eventually focusing on a poorly lit hole in the ice. Gurgling and splashing noises come from it. These dudes and others are just straight up pumping bursts down the hole. Eventually, after a few minutes, these dudes use long hooked poles to dig around and then heave something up. Shit you not. 20 plus foot long fish like snake looking fucker, at least 3.5 feet in diameter. I'd say it was an anaconda, but it was brown and it had really nasty flabby fins that they grabbed and stretched out, full of sea lice and holes and shit. Big black eyes, mouth full of the gnarliest teeth I'd ever seen. Huge air sacs on its underside. Looked like a lungfish or some shit. Video cuts to a series of photos of the thing, better lit than the video, presumably because they were shot with flash. Mottled brown skin with plenty of blood smeared all over it, from the bullet scraping the sides of the hole that they pulled it out of. One of the pictures showed what I'm guessing was the contents of its stomach. There was all sorts of crazy shit in there. Don't go swimming in Russia.
When I was about 13 or 14 in 2005, I woke up in the middle of the night, sometime between 2 to 4 a.m. It wasn't unusual for me to wake up in the middle of the night and walk to my mom's bedroom and fall back asleep. This time was different. The moon's reflection on my wall was so bright, I thought it was unusual. I started to walk down the hallway and had a habit of looking in each bedroom, down the stairs, into the bathroom, and into my sister's room. I was standing in the corner of her door, and it was right there. I saw a man, about 6 feet tall, all black, no features, no hat or clothes or red eyes, standing beside my sister's bed, looking down at her. I was frozen in fear, and at the same time, I had said aloud, "Mom," a couple of times, trying to imagine it was anything other than the alternative would be. I even remember calling out to see if it was my dog, even though I know that it makes no sense. The shadow person was completely silent and completely still. I was terrified. It then started to turn its head towards me, slowly, with its body still. I immediately freaked out and ran down the hall into my mom's room screaming, "There's a man in her room," over and over again. My mom jumped out of the bed instantly and ran down the hallway, then flipped my sister's bedroom light on, but there was nothing there. She checked the entire house, thinking it maybe could have been my brother's friend. There was no one in the house and no evidence of a break-in. I was left physically shaking and unable to stop. I couldn't go to sleep for the rest of the night. There was no way it was a person who could have escaped that fast. It all happened so quick. After it happened, I didn't know what to make of it. I had never heard of shadow people, and had no idea how many other people have seen them around the world. It was only until years later, I was watching TV, and I think on Discovery, there was a show playing of a little girl who saw shadow people. I was shocked because the shadow person on TV looked exactly what I saw and stared, and started to look more into it. I also think my experience was unique, in that I came across it when it was possibly doing something to my sister. The shadow people stories I read seemed to revolve around sleep paralysis, seeing them out of the corner of your eye, and it happening directly to them, none of which are the case for me. I was fully awake, staring directly at this thing, for a substantial amount of time, called out to it, and ran to get help. No one could tell me shadow people don't exist, and I do get annoyed seeing science trying to explain the phenomenon as hallucinations. It's a slap in the face of those of us who know what we saw. I just have so many questions still, like why was it standing over my sister? Why did I happen to stumble across it? Why was I able to see it? Why has no one else in my family seen it? Why was it there? What is it? How come so many people have seen them? I truly hope, though, that I never see it again.
When I was a kid, from the ages of 3 through 7, I used to see and was mortified by these really weird short-looking people on a semi-regular basis. Best I can describe them was a humanoid body. Their faces looked somewhat of a human that was extremely burnt and charred with something that looked like red lipstick over their mouths and eyes to hide the burnt areas, and they wore this kind of silver-looking onesie, like pajamas. Oftentimes I'd see them when I was alone in the kitchen or trying to take a shit in the bathroom, but sometimes they would appear in the living room when my whole family was present. The earliest time I recall seeing them, I was almost like 3, almost 4 years of age. My family and I lived in Los Angeles at the time, and at the latest, I was almost 8 years old. My family since then moved from Los Angeles to Guadalajara, Mexico. I was most often visited by these weird burnt-looking humanoids when I lived in Guadalajara. When this would happen, I recall everything going black, as if someone turned the lights off and the only thing that was clearly visible was their face and bodies. They would often just stare at me or make attempts to reach out to my face. Sometimes I'd be with my family and the lights would go out. Everything around me would disappear, and before I knew it, I would be surrounded by these creatures for minutes at a time. Then suddenly, they would disappear. The lights would come back on and everyone was doing the same thing they were doing before the lights went out. It was as if they froze in time when the lights were out and I had gone to a different plane. When I lived in California, I was physically dragged by my ankles out of my bed to an eerie looking red hole that appeared on the wall. I remember hearing my mom saying a prayer of some sort. The lights came back on, and there was weird fluorescent symbols on the wall that looked like sigils. My family was deeply religious. After seeing these things for years, my family decided it was best we told the church so they could pray for me in hopes that these things would go away. Oddly enough, I remember going to church one day in Guadalajara. My family and several people stood around me, holding my shoulders and my head, while the priest, we were Christian, not Catholic, did a prayer. I recall feeling some kind of nausea, and I began to vomit in front of everyone. I don't recall feeling any different other than the nausea, but ever since that day, I never saw those burnt looking things again. To this day, I'm not a religious or spiritual person. My family remains religious. I have absolutely no explanation as to what any of that was. I'm 35 now, and every now and then I still remember it and try to make sense of what I experienced, but I just don't have an explanation. Chaneke tried to kidnap you. That is freaky. Did your family see them too when you were dragged out of the bed? Did your mom witness that, or you told her that afterwards? My mom said that she had put me to bed and she was cleaning the kitchen/living room. She said she heard the signs of a struggle in the bedroom and me crying. She opened the door and the room was pitch black and the light wouldn't turn on, but she could see from the light scatter from the hallway that I was definitely being dragged. That's when she began to pray. She didn't see anyone or anything out of the ordinary in the room, which made it even more odd. At some point during the prayer, the lights came on and I told her I was being dragged by burnt looking people. I told her about the red hole in the wall, which had also disappeared by then, but she didn't see it. When I was explaining to her what I saw, that's when I began to see a weird green glow that looked like sigils on the wall. It was pretty faint, kind of like a glow in the dark green room in a lit room. She even allowed me to trace some of them with a pencil so she could have an idea of what I saw.
Alright, I'll be straight up with you all. Before I begin, I took 2 grams of magic mushrooms 5 or 6 hours before the sighting occurred. While the bulk of my high passed away, there were still lingering feelings. It was relevant to note that internally, I had a particularly paranoid and fearful trip, although on the outside, it seemed like I was having a great time, dancing, interacting with others, and being generally social. Anyhow, it was about 3 AM, October the 1st, and I was in bed, just scrolling through my phone. I had returned from my night out several hours ago and relaxing. My partner was asleep next to me, and my cat was in his usual place at the end of the bed. I didn't feel high anymore, just wide awake still. I had this sudden eerie feeling in my stomach, and both me and my cat looked up from the bed towards the open door of my bedroom. This dark black column comes through, and my cat gets spooked, and runs from the end of the bed and sits square on my lap, watching it, claws digging through the blankets into my leg. The column wasn't clearly defined, just a sort of vague black shape that lingered most in periphery, and then jumped in an almost teleport sort of way, a foot or 2 at a time, around the edge of the bed, back and forth. My cat is tracking its movements with me, and laying low onto my lap, watching it, anxious. At this point, I was curious, and even greeted whatever it was. I said what's up to it. Seeing how distressed my cat was, I started instructing him not to be afraid, and to just whack them with his paw, and that they couldn't hurt him. But because he was afraid, I began getting annoyed, and told whatever was there to fuck off, because it was scaring him. It darted back and forth a few more times and left. I honestly would have dismissed this more easily, had my cat not been so affected, and his reactions affirmed something was happening outside of my own perception. The whole thing was about 5 minutes in duration. My thoughts on this occurrence are the following. Firstly, having taken mushrooms, I had placed myself in a condition where I was perhaps more perceptive of other dimensional phenomena. Also, maybe given the particularly paranoid and anxious trip I had earlier, I had drawn a curious voyeur who wished to feed on that fearful energy. All in all, I thought it was really interesting and one-of-a-kind experience. Not necessarily negative, just felt unsettling due to how outside of the natural order of things it was. I have done mushrooms since, in the hopes of another sighting, but to no avail.
Not my story, but my late father-in-law's. The father-in-law, growing up in rural area of Japan, would constantly explore around the nearby woods. In July one day, it was getting late, around 7 through 8. When he was heading home, he noticed something in the woods with him. It was this girl, around his age at the time. She was dressed normally, but didn't say anything, other than screaming to get help. Father-in-law runs back into town and tells a story about the girl screaming for help to his parents. They tell some nearby neighbors who say they'll go look into it. In the meantime, apparently parents are more concerned about seeing the girl than someone being in trouble. For about 3 weeks afterwards, father-in-law would have a recurring nightmare about the girl, where she's just screaming and instead of eyes, there were empty black pits. But about a week after, nightmares stopped being recurring in the house one day. Father-in-law is in the kitchen making a snack when he unmistakably sees the same girl in his house. Makes a run for it and locks the door, tells a neighbor. They search every corner of the house, but no sign of anyone else. One night this girl would appear in his bedroom, once again empty pits for eyes, but she disappeared just as soon as she had appeared. After a while of sightings, he went to a Shinto priest in the town to explain what had been going on for some time. Priest tells him something along the lines of an evil spirit has followed him, and she is trying to ruin him. Priest performs a ceremony to keep the spirit at bay, not banish it, but it can't directly harm him. At around age 19, father-in-law moves into an apartment in Kyoto, and the sightings have been sparse, but one night he was watching TV. Heard a knock on his apartment door, opens it, no one. Looks down the hall and sees the little girl again. About 2 years after that, of very sparse sightings, father-in-law immigrates to America with his wife. Timeline of this would have been 1987, I think. Being 1987-ish, father-in-law and wife have come to America, living in California at the time. Father-in-law is working on cleaning up the house's garage when he hears the door to the garage open up. Turns around, sees empty-eyed girl. She looks visibly angry, disappears. After a few minutes, he begins to hear loud slamming on the garage door. Father-in-law described it as if someone had repeatedly thrown themselves at the garage door at full force. Lifts door to see no one there. 2 years later, his son would be born, and on the morning after his birth, he saw the empty-eyed girl throughout the hospital. He stands his ground. No words exchanged, but he apparently stared down the entity. Said he could feel the absolute anger this thing gave off. Yes, he would refer to the empty-eyed girl as a thing. About 4 years after that, his daughter would be born. Would see the empty-eyed girl again. From then on, sightings of the entity would happen in cycles where it would appear, activity would happen, but then after that it stopped for weeks, months, and on one occasion, years. Fast forward some years, father-in-law is with me, hanging out at mine and my fiance's place. Says he sees the empty-eyed girl again, right out of our window. He tells me the story of the girl and the sightings of her. Tells me he's sure that he'll have to face it when he dies. He apparently had seen her again on the wedding day in 2016. Father-in-law finally passes away last June. Not of cough, but had a brain aneurysm immediately after winning a poker game with co-workers. 2 weeks prior to his death, he admitted to me that he knew he didn't have much time left, and that it could be possibly waiting.
I once came face to face with a skinwalker, and survived. This happened several years ago, but it's burned into my mind like nothing else. I work at a lumber company, where my job is to scout out parts of forests suitable for harvesting. It's hard work, as I need to fill a quota given to me by the company, and keep to standards set by the EPA, and it often means I spend days out in the wilderness, looking for good lumber spots. Well, it was one of these extended camping trips, where I had my encounter. I was 4 days in, and I had already found several good spots for the company, but wanted to get a few more in before I left. I spent the first half of the day surveying the area, being careful to note my path, so I didn't get lost. When it happened, "Babe!" I heard it as clear as day. It was my wife. I mean, it had to be. It was her voice. "Babe, I need your help," she said again. I didn't understand what was going on. She kept calling out to me, calling out for help, but it was coming from all around me, and it sounded like she was getting closer. I stood there paralyzed, unable to think and unable to really do anything. I quickly spotted something moving in the bushes in front of me. It was a deer, but it was different somehow. I couldn't focus at first, but then I realized what I was looking at. It wasn't a deer. I mean, it looked like a deer, but it was standing on its back legs, had no fur, and was a sickly gray color. "Babe, why won't you help me?" it said. It was speaking to me, but it sounded like my wife. It stepped out of the bushes into the clearing in front of me. I ran. I kept running, even as it stopped chasing me. I had never ran so fast before. It was morning when I finally reached my truck. I managed to return to the lumber office. I couldn't tell them what I saw. None of them would believe me. I simply gave them my list of sites for harvesting. I wish I hadn't, since several of the lumberjacks have disappeared since the company started harvesting the trees in the area.
Okay, X, I have a story. This could be very, very long, but I'll do my best to condense it down. This is a story about my Irish grandfather and our ex encounter. Be me, 23 years old, Irish but raised in New York since childhood, so I don't have an accent or anything. Don't really know anything about extended family except that my mom was adopted and my dad has family in the IRA. Never actually been outside of the US except for one time when we went to Mexico for vacation roughly 10 years ago. One day I receive a call from a blocked number claiming it's my grandpa. Thick Irish accent. I never spoke to my grandfather, only know what he looks like from an old photo my dad keeps on his desk. At first I was skeptical that it was even him, but he tells me in detail about my dad and about things not many people could know. I won't repeat them. I am emotionless throughout this whole thing. He tells me he's dying and I'm the only family he has left who's willing to visit him. He tells me not to tell my dad about this call or he'll keep me from going. Okay, I guess. He sends me plane tickets over email and says, "Take the third exit. I'll be wearing a green tie." Already this guy's kinda pissing me off. He didn't ask if I was willing, didn't ask whether I even wanted to, didn't even ask whether I even wanted it. If it works for my schedule, he just somehow found out everything about how to contact me and told me to be there. Nevertheless, I am intrigued. I can't just let the remnant of my heritage slip by. I decide to go. Trip goes fine, smooth sailing, land at airport. When I land, I go to the third exit to see him. Tall man, maybe 6'4", thin silvery hair. Looks like he did in the picture, just a bit wrinklier. Still standing up straight, moving quickly, looking fit and healthy. Shakes my hand and smiles, telling me to come with him. We spent a few hours driving around, catching up with each other. Turns out Dad didn't want me to see him because he was in the IRA, who would have guessed. He left the IRA 20 years ago, but Dad wouldn't give him a chance to get in contact. Been living in limbo ever since, no rebel brothers to back him up and no society accept him due to his past. Refuses to move from hometown for some reason. "I've lived my whole life in this town and I'll die on these green hills." Eventually conversation turns to him dying. He tells me sometime soon he will die. I ask him if it's an IRA hit. He says no. Tells me it's something more sinister but refuses to specify. Starts getting mad schizo vibes from the old man. He goes on telling me how he was writing his will and realized he didn't have anyone to pass the property onto. None of his family would reply, but me, so he drove me out there. He wants me to spend a week with him, and if he's still alive, he'll give me the property anyway. I'm very grateful. I kinda like this guy. It's a shame he thinks he's gonna die. We stop by the coast and I take a cool photo of him. That's the only pic I'm gonna show cause I don't wanna dox myself. We finally make it to his property and dump off my luggage. Then we make a beeline to his favorite pub. It's a nice walk, though it's getting late. After a few hours of drinking and singing and swapping stories, I decide he's had his fill. Finish our drinks and start the walk home singing our songs. Musharingurum dunada, whack for the daddy-o, whack for the daddy-o, there's whiskey in the jar. Suddenly hear a woman scream really, really loud. Pierces our singing. Grandpa just stops and starts crying. I think someone might be getting mugged, but I can't find the source of the scream. It stops right there, so I decide to call the police. Grandpa stops me and tells me not to bother. When we walk home, he sings this weird song. Perhaps it's just the wind that's whistling round the window pane, or maybe it's just the thunder or the rhythm of the rain. We walk home and I fall asleep on the couch. When I wake up, he's dead. Pastor throws a huge funeral because people should be forgiven of their sins or something. I never end up getting the property. He died before he could sign me into the will. It just went to the government by default. I spent a few days in a hotel, then took the plane back. It doesn't take a genius to figure out what's going on here. I'm 90% sure my grandpa and I had an encounter with a banshee, and for my grandpa, it wasn't the first time.
I was living in a small town when all this went down. It was a Friday night, and my parents had gone out, and I was home alone playing Halo on my Xbox 360, when I heard knocking on my door. This happened around 9:30, and despite being 15, I wasn't a dumb kid, and knew better than to open the door late at night to strangers. But the knocking continued on and off for the next 15 minutes, before finally stopping. I went to grab a snack from the kitchen, and I almost gagged as I walked in. There was this horrible smell that had filled the room, that wasn't anywhere else in the house. I ran to the back door, which opened from the kitchen into the backyard, but stopped before opening it. You see, there was a small window that allowed you to see outside, with an outside light sensor just above the door. I stopped myself from opening the door because I could see a figure standing just outside of it. The light seemed to avoid it, making it dark and shadowy. There appeared to be antlers or something on its head. Then there were two glowing red eyes staring back at me, and then it spoke to me. "You look like you need some help. Let me in and I can help you." It spoke with a raspy voice that haunts me even as I type this. It was horrible and disgusting. I honestly don't know how to describe it. I stood there for a long time as it kept saying, "Let me help you." Eventually it left before my parents got back. I told them about it, and they rang the police saying some crazy person had tried breaking in after they found some weird footprints in the backyard. It wasn't until years later that I found out about skinwalkers and realized what I had seen.
Hi X, so here's this. Something happened to me on the morning of September 24, 2003. Through the years I had discarded the whole thing as a dream or a hallucination, until I came across a picture on Instagram that perfectly described the place I visited on that fateful day 18 years ago. First of all, you have to excuse my terrible English. I was born in South Africa in 1981, but I moved to Argentina when I was 3, which is where I grew up. Everything was always as normal as it gets. There's really nothing special about me or my life. On September 24th, 2003, however, I was involved in a pretty heavy traffic accident. I was driving a motorbike when a woman came out of nowhere trying to cross the street. The car next to me swerved to avoid her and ended up hitting me and another car. When I woke up, I was there. I was in what you call the back rooms. When I came across Pig Related, I knew immediately that this was the same place I had been, or had dreamed I had been, all those years ago. I tried to devour every thread and YouTube video I could find on the topic, but at some point it just became way too much, way too complex, way too different from what I experienced for me. It was much simpler. I woke up alone in a room, old carpet, yellowish walls, bright buzzing lights. Not exactly the same as the picture, but eerily close to it. The room was totally square, about 2.5 meters tall, and with no furniture or other objects of any kind. I woke up lying on the carpet in the middle of the room. I was wearing the same clothes I had at the time of the accident, but my watch was gone. Parts of the carpet around me appeared to be stained with black dots. I felt something on my forehead and realized there was blood in my hands, arms, head, and pants. But I wasn't injured, or cut, or even in pain. I did feel slightly dizzy and confused. When I got up to my feet and looked around, I thought to myself that I must be at the hospital. The room had an exit with no door that led to what appeared to be a hallway, so that's where I walked, and that's where the nightmare began. The panic came very soon. Although it's certainly amazing how long you could keep telling yourself that there must be some explanation, I must have walked for over an hour, through hundreds of empty rooms and long hallways, all with the same carpet, yellowish walls, and buzzing lights. Everything was empty, and there was nothing that could serve as some sort of landmark, but somehow I knew that every room was different. For 8 hours, I roamed through the back rooms. Then on the 9th hour, I found a shoe. It's hard to describe the extreme joy that I felt after finding something so mundane. It was just a shoe, just one in the corner of the room. It was a little girl's shoe. It looked like the shoes girls would wear to church in the late 1980s. That's the best reference I could give you, just a shoe. But it was at least something. It gave the back room some sense of scale. It gave me some sense of hope. I picked it up and put it in my jacket. I walked for another 8 hours and found more objects throughout the many rooms. A broken pair of glasses, an empty tissue box, a chessboard with no pieces, a beautiful volume of Aquinas Summas Theologica printed in London in 1902, and some aluminum foil. I even found a room with a dirty couch on it. It somehow seemed I was getting closer to civilization, whatever that meant. What I hadn't been able to find, however, was food or water. With very little energy left, I resigned myself to camp for the night. The bright buzzing lights didn't allow such distinctions. Take some rest and hope for the best for the next day. The voice woke me up. I knew right away it was a human voice, though I couldn't quite make out what it was saying. I jumped to my feet and started to pay attention to where the voice was coming from so I could follow it. As I was getting closer, I could hear what it was saying. 707 tig. 700 tig. I looked in room after room, turning from hallway to hallway, and the voice became much clearer. 700 tig. 700 tig. I finally got to a large rectangular room which actually looked populated. There were 2 couches, an old wooden table, and some trash. It was the least empty room I had found until that point, and there in the corner was a man in a squatting position, looking at the wall, waving his hand as he counted numbers in Dutch. 700 tig. 700 tig. The man was probably in mid-30s. He was bald, had a thick beard and dark skin. He heard me come into the room, interrupted his counting, turned his head to look at me. He looked surprised to see me standing there, but not really shocked. After staring at me for a few seconds, he turned his head to the wall and resumed his counting. As tired and dehydrated as I was ecstatic to find another human being, so I approached him and greeted him in Afrikaans, which I can barely speak anymore. He stopped counting, got up to his feet, and looked at me with more interest now, and asked me how I knew the language of his father. I told him I was born in a place where many people spoke a similar language, and he looked at me with a funny smile and told me that was impossible. He then handed me an old plastic bottle, so old the plastic had turned yellow, with some of the water in it, and I drank until the bottle was empty. Without saying a word, he handed me a chocolate energy bar, pointed towards one of the couches, where there were bags of chips and some other junk food. We both ate in silence for a while until he asked me who I was and what I was doing there. Told him my name and said that I was lost. I asked him his name and what the place was. My father called me son, so that's what you can call me. This place is the world. I told him that the world surely extended beyond the yellowish walls, but once again he looked at me like he didn't understand. There is no beyond. This is the world, and those who look for an exit are foolish. My father told me this. I learned that son had been in the back room since he was a little kid. Both his father and him were transported decades before from what I suspect was somewhere in Indonesia. He had no memory of the front rooms. The back rooms was all he knew. I asked him about the exit that his father used to talk about. He told me many people think that the world is a labyrinth, that many spend their lives looking for a way out. His father, who probably looked for an exit for years, had finally resigned himself to live the rest of his life in the back rooms. I told son that I was foolish because I also thought there must be a way out. I told him I was determined to find it, and all I needed to know was where to procure food and water. To my surprise, he decided to come with me. Only a few rooms from son's room, there was a passageway to a particularly large hallway where the carpet felt wet. A single faucet came out of one of the far walls, and it was dripping constantly. It could not really be opened, but if you left the water bottle underneath long enough, then it would fill to the top. Incredibly, there were also 2 vending machines on the same wall. The glass had been broken, and junk food was pouting out of both of them. That was son's oasis, where he would get food and water to survive. When I asked him what he would do when the food ran out, he looked at me with surprise, told me matter-of-factly that it never ran out. I asked him why he didn't live in that room with the food and water. He said that sometimes it got too crowded and that he didn't like some of the groups that also came for supplies. After stocking up in food or water, I asked son how big the world was and how well he knew it. He told me it was not infinite, but that its real size had not been revealed to any man. He said he knew the land of sun very well, which was the term he used to describe all the rooms and hallways he had mapped out in his head. I then inquired if his father had ever come close to finding the exit or something related to it, but he firmly rejected the idea. Son wouldn't recommend where to go. He didn't even want to lead the way, he just wanted to follow me. For a moment, I pondered between 2 options: trying to keep walking in a straight line, as much as the layout of the rooms allowed it, and hope that it would eventually go to the edge of the world. The other option was to follow the ancient Greeks' advice to escape a labyrinth, which is always turn left. I decided on the second one, and just like that, son and I were on our way to find the exit to the back rooms. For 7 days we roamed. It was hard to keep track of the time, but I'm sure it was at least 7 days with 7 nights. I learned about the back rooms. I learned that large rectangular rooms with water faucets and seemingly bottomless vending machines were a relatively common feature, each one no more than a day's journey from the other. I learned that even though it's mostly empty space, they were definitely not alone. One day we saw a little blonde girl crying alone in a corner, but when we approached, she just ran away. One night as we were sleeping, an old German man came to us begging for water. We found 2 Chinese twins that couldn't or wouldn't talk to us. There was emptiness and confusion in everyone's eyes. I want to make it clear right now that everything I saw in the back rooms had the same aesthetic: dull carpet, yellowish walls, bright buzzing lights. I know people talk about different levels, about low-hanging mist, about some kind of creature or monster lurking around. I never saw or heard any of that. Everything was the carpet, those walls, those lights. An occasional pipe or duct would decorate a room, but for the most part, that's how it was. I did learn from some that the backrooms had not always looked like this, but he didn't know how they looked before. Someone had also told me that there were many families or groups in the world, that not all of them were good. I never saw any of these groups until the very last day, when we found the cultist stair. The cultist stair was a group of about 20 people, men and women, who lived in one of the largest rooms I ever saw in the back rooms. It even had 3 vending machines. They had a leader that called himself Justice, and even though they spoke English between themselves, I could clearly see it was a very international group. Justice was originally from Spain, which you'd think would have made it easier for me to communicate with him, but everyone there seemed to be in some sort of perpetual enlightenment / brainwash / crazy state that made it really hard to get answers to my questions. Sun distrusted them all and told me many times we should continue on our own journey. However, that's when Justice took me to their holy place, the stair. A few hallways from the main room, the cult of the stair had the ceremonial center, a room with a staircase. It was just an ugly concrete staircase with cheap metal railing, and it went up and down, with no visible end in sight either way. I asked where the staircase led, and they told me it led up and down. Same carpet, same walls, same lights, just apparently infinite levels of it. I learned that every 7 cycles, some arbitrary unit of time that the cult defined, they would offer a sacrifice to the stairs, and someone would let themselves be thrown down the shaft. They would watch people fall until they disappeared from sight. I was so shocked by these pagan practices that I failed to notice when they made a circle around us. Someone very strong hugged me from behind and held me in place, while someone else was quickly tying my hands behind my back. Sun put up a good fight. He even managed to knock down one of the bigger guys, but he was also ultimately subdued. The last few things I remember is the chanting, the screaming and praying. I remember seeing Sun out of the corner of my eye as he was thrown down the stair and shaft, and then me. Then I was flying through the air, falling down the shaft. I fell down for what it seemed like an eternity, and then darkness. Complete darkness. More darkness. And then some hospital sounds. I was lying on a bed at the Italian hospital in Buenos Aires. My whole family was there. Doctors were there, and even the family lawyer was there. They told me I was in a bad traffic accident and had a broken rib. Other than that, I was okay. Time went by. I always thought the whole thing as some sort of anesthesia-induced dream. Sometimes though, very once in a while, I wonder if Sun is living a good life back in Indonesia. Great read, OP. How long were you unconscious in real life? That's actually a great question, and something I forgot to mention. According to my family, I was unconscious for a little over 20 minutes, maybe less. This has always been hard for me to comprehend, as I spent at least 9 days in the back rooms.